The world is completely frozen, scarred by wars, betrayals, and deaths. But Han Feng is reborn with mysterious powers and builds a base filled with resources before the apocalypse. Now, he is determined to take revenge on those who betrayed him. But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It would help us a lot. And now, enjoy the video. The story begins in a world devastated by a new ice age. Global temperatures were dropping more and more, and humanity was facing extreme cold. On television, a reporter tried to console the population, saying the government would never abandon them and that everyone would survive the disaster. But in reality, if it depended on the government, everyone was doomed. At the very moment he said that, a frozen airplane fell from the sky, crushing the reporter. While all this was happening, Han Feng, the protagonist, watched the scene through his partially frozen television. Suddenly, someone called his name. He got up and, upon opening the door, came face to face with a girl named Li Huina. She seemed distressed and asked to come in quickly, since the outside environment was dangerous due to the cold. As soon as she entered, without warning, she kissed Han Feng. Surprised and embarrassed, he didn't understand what was happening. But Li Huina explained that, in this apocalypse, she had just realized who was truly worth loving. She said that it's in hard times that you see who really matters, and she added that she would do anything for him. However, right after that, she kneed him painfully between the legs, something that completely contradicted everything she had just said. Even so, Han Feng smiled, saying he was happy that she had finally understood her own feelings. But she interrupted him, asking him not to say anything else and just close his eyes. When he obeyed, he was suddenly struck by a fatal blow from a man who had appeared out of nowhere. Mortally wounded, Han Feng collapsed to the floor. Li Huina then asked why the man had done that, but he coldly replied that she already knew this would happen. The truth was that, in that frozen, lawless world, no one cared about human life anymore. Right after, the two began searching the place for supplies. Meanwhile, Han Feng felt he could no longer move. Maybe he was already dead. That was what death felt like. The last thing he saw was the image of Li Huina and the other man together, looking like a couple. He thought bitterly that, in the end, all of that had happened because of that heartless woman. But in his final thoughts, he promised himself that in his next life, he wouldn't be useless anymore. At that moment, a light appeared before him. He saw it at the end of a tunnel and thought it might be the path to heaven. The light was warm, something rare in that frozen world. When he touched it, a red glow appeared, and suddenly he woke up startled in his bed. Upon seeing the sunset through the window, he felt deep relief, as if witnessing something he thought he'd never see again. When he checked the date, he saw it was the 28th of June. The apocalypse would only begin on the 15th of July. That meant he had gone back in time. He was now a month before the disaster began. Confused, Han Feng started wondering if he had really been reborn. But he noticed something strange. Since he woke up, there was an unusual light shining from his hand. Despite emitting heat, the light didn't cause any discomfort. At first, it seemed useless. However, when he sneezed, the light changed color and turned green. Not only that, it began to grow. Still not understanding what was happening, he sat on the couch, feeling his body begin to collapse, perhaps because of that strange light. Desperate, he started shaking his hand, trying to make the light disappear. He remembered a comic where the protagonist was reborn with a powerful ability and wondered if something similar was happening to him. He picked up a knife to test some power, but nothing happened. Meanwhile, his stomach growled from hunger. When he opened the fridge, he found nothing. There was only some roasted soybeans on the table, something that certainly wouldn't satisfy his hunger. Even so, he put a few in his mouth. That's when something inexplicable happened. A plant sprouted at the very moment he chewed the soybeans. Not understanding anything, Han Feng noticed his exhaustion had disappeared, and the green light faded as well. Curious, he examined the plant and saw it was a soybean sprout. At that moment, he began to suspect this might be the power of his new ability. Impressed by what had just happened, he decided that, as soon as he had the chance, he would study that phenomenon more closely. Despite all the confusion surrounding his rebirth, the most important thing for Han Feng now was to gather supplies before the apocalypse began. He knew he had to act fast. After waking up on that new day, he clearly remembered that first, a red light appeared in his right hand. Then it turned green. The green light made his heart race and brought an intense feeling of exhaustion. When he held a handful of soybeans in his hand, he ended up turning them into a sprout. That's when he realized that this might be his new ability. While still trying to understand everything, none other than Li Huina showed up. She appeared suddenly, saying it was a coincidence to find him there, and commented that it seemed like the two of them were made for each other. In his previous life, Han Feng had chased after Li Huina for 3 years, treating her like a goddess. He was willing to do anything to please her, even though, deep down, he knew she was only using him. However, he never imagined she would be the one responsible for his death. Even so, that was not the time to think about revenge. He needed to focus on surviving, and for that, gathering supplies was essential. Li Huina asked if he was awake, but Han Feng pretended to be distracted, replying that she looked so beautiful she had thrown him him off. She then suggested that since they had met up, they could go out together. To her surprise, Han Feng refused. He said today wouldn't be possible, which visibly shocked her. In his past life, she always manipulated him into paying for everything. But now he had no intention of being a fool again. He knew the largest supermarket in the city, called WDMA, was the best stocked in the entire eastern region. When the Ice Age began, that market had been completely emptied overnight, and no one ever discovered who had done it. With a few days left before the apocalypse, Han Feng had to prepare and secure everything he could. He made a list of what he needed to buy: thermal clothing, medicine, daily essentials, and fuel. The biggest problem was money. He had almost none, but upon checking his balance, he saw that his credit limit had increased. Taking advantage of that, he started applying for every loan he could, determined to make as many purchases as possible. Meanwhile, Li Huina was outraged at being ignored. She wondered how a poor guy without a car could simply reject her like that. But soon after, Han Feng appeared driving a new car. He parked and called out to her casually. She was surprised, asking if that car was really his. He confidently confirmed, saying he had just bought it and that his father was making a lot of money doing business in America. He also lied, saying he had only gone to the airport to see his father off. Hearing that, Li Huina changed her demeanor. She began pretending to be surprised, said she had no idea, and even cried, claiming he had been cold to her earlier. She said she thought he was pulling away as a friend. Han Feng, acting just as well, pulled her close and said he could never pull away from her because she was too important to him. That was exactly what she wanted to hear. Then, Li Huina smiled triumphantly, saying that Han Feng had always been very special to her. She took the opportunity to invite him to dinner and a movie that night. But by that time, Han Feng had already vanished from in front of her. He was in the parking lot, organizing his purchases in the trunk of his car, thinking that he still had a lot to do that day. When she approached and asked why he had bought so many things, Han Feng responded vaguely, saying they were just items he liked. To keep up appearances, he added that he had bought a gift for her as well. Li Huina smiled, satisfied, and said she'd be waiting for the gift at home. Deep down, she believed she had fooled Han Feng easily, but he was well aware of her intentions, and thought to himself that he couldn't let Li Huina find out anything about his supplies. He needed those items to survive the coming apocalypse. Revenge would come in time, and that included both Li Huina and the man who had killed him in his previous life. For now, the most important thing was to be prepared. With that in mind, Han Feng began to feel more optimistic. He knew that on the day the apocalypse began, the temperature would drop drastically, and it would start snowing non-stop. Forecasts predicted temperatures would suddenly hit 20 degrees Celsius, and in the following month plummet to 70 degrees Celsius. The world would be covered in a thick layer of snow, making it impossible to leave home. That's why he needed to stockpile as much food as possible and pack everything carefully to avoid suspicion. This process had to be done at night, with extreme caution. Since electricity would stop working during the apocalypse, Han Feng also bought a generator and stored enough fuel to last an entire year. He knew the heating system would also be shut down, so he reinforced all doors and windows in the house and made modifications to keep the indoor temperature bearable. He also prepared a special room just for storing the supplies. When all the preparations were finally completed, it was already the 14th of July. There was only one day left before the climate collapse began. Han Feng knew that the next step would be crucial. The supplies he had gathered still weren't enough to survive for long. His only hope lay in the mysterious ability that allowed him to transform soybeans into full-grown plants. Sitting at the table, with a plate in front of him, he looked at the soy he had grown using his power. He still didn't fully understand how it worked, but he had to find out if it was safe to eat. Upon tasting the food, he confirmed it was edible. The texture and flavor were normal. That gave him a sliver of hope. If he could apply this ability to other foods, perhaps he could solve the problem of hunger. But after a few hours of testing, he fell to his knees with an intense headache. The ability seemed to overload both his body and mind. Even so, he now had a slightly better understanding of it. Before passing out, he had tested the power with various foods. Some didn't react at all. Others, like soybeans, evolved quickly from seed to mature plant, ready for consumption. However, not everything worked. Sometimes, the seeds would explode, and in their place, a black substance similar to charcoal would appear, though much lighter. He realized this substance could be used as fuel, as it burned easily. With this, a new possibility emerged. He no longer had to worry about heating his house. Han Feng continued testing his ability repeatedly. Although he still hadn't found a clear pattern, he understood that there was some hidden logic behind how the power functioned. At the very least, he now understood one important point. Consciousness was the key to activation. When he meditated and imagined himself surrounded by nature, the ability would manifest more frequently. This indicated that his mental state directly influenced the results. In a new attempt, he decided to experiment with a piece of meat, but this time, there was no reaction. Perhaps his ability only worked with plants. Still, during meditation, he could clearly feel the presence of two lights within him. The green one, which he already knew, and the red one he had seen, just after being reborn but hadn't yet explored. After deeply focusing, Han Feng finally managed to activate the red light he had felt before. He decided to test it directly on a piece of meat. The result was unexpected and disgusting. The meat turned into something repulsive, with a grotesque appearance, which made him immediately throw it to the floor. However, upon closer inspection, he realized the red light wasn't just heat. It wasn't a simple heating process, it was a form of matter, disintegration. From this experience, he began forming a theory. The green light represented the evolution of matter, while the red light symbolized its disintegration. Curious to understand the potential of combining them, Han Feng decided to merge both powers in a new experiment. To his surprise, the combination had an impressive effect. The meat rapidly expanded and fused with the soy sprouts in his hand. The result was a piece of meat that looked fresh and of very high quality. Excited by the discovery, he tried repeating the experiment. However, the following attempts failed, and he realized the fusion's effects were unstable. Even so, he considered it a major breakthrough. If he could fully master that ability, he could rise to the top of the new world. However, he also realized he would need weapons for protection. Food was essential, but so was security. The apocalypse had already begun, and the temperature kept dropping. On the streets, the biting cold cut through skin, and he knew that in less than a week the world would reach 4-5 degrees Celsius. He needed to find a weapon urgently. The problem was that the sale of weapons was illegal, and Han Feng didn't know anyone involved in that kind of business. As he walked through the ice-covered streets, he spotted a man trying to sell Chinese cigarettes. The man's face looked familiar. After a few seconds of observation, he remembered who it was. His name was Li Ziyi, better known as Brother Li, a resident of the same neighborhood. Han Feng knew he was influential in the area. Although he didn't have a formal job, Li Ziyi was known for being constantly involved in various projects and had many connections. Han Feng believed this could be his chance. He approached confidently and greeted him. Brother Li looked at him curiously, asking if they had met before. Han Feng said yes, introducing himself as Little Han and reminding him that they had exchanged greetings before. Li Ziyi apologized, saying he had been too busy with his projects and that his memory wasn't what it used to be. Then he asked what Han Feng wanted. As he approached, Han Feng discreetly whispered in his ear, revealing his request. Li Ziyi's reaction was immediate. He was alarmed, saying it was far too dangerous. He explained that he didn't get involved in illegal things and couldn't just get his hands on a weapon. But Han Feng insisted, saying he only wanted one for self-defense. He shared that the other day, while riding his bike, he was humiliated when a stranger spat in his face. When he tried to defend himself, the man spat in Han Feng's face again. Provoked, Han Feng retaliated with a punch. The man left furious, swearing revenge. The next day, he followed through on his threat. He waited for Han Feng with several accomplices, and they all beat him up. After that, Han Feng realized he urgently needed a weapon to protect himself. Ziyi was disgusted by the story, and said it was outrageous for someone to spit on another person like that. Feeling sympathetic, he decided to help Han Feng. He said he'd take him to a place where they could buy a weapon, and added that if his car weren't in the shop, he'd take him personally. However, Han Feng surprised him by saying they could use his own car. Ziyi was impressed. He hadn't expected that. During the ride, Ziyi complimented the car and asked how much it had cost. Han Feng replied that it was between 70 and 80,000. Ziyi said that wasn't bad, but still considered it cheap. At the same time, he was bragging on social media, posting that he was in a new car. Meanwhile, on the streets, some people were commenting that the weather felt strange. Even though it was summer, the cold felt like winter. Later on, Ziyi began negotiating with some people and even pretended, in front of everyone, that Han Feng's car was his. Shortly after, they met with the boss of the place. Ziyi introduced Han Feng as his younger brother and said he needed to buy a gun. The boss, named Liu Yu, thought it was something serious, but when he found out it was just for a gun, he simply showed a pistol and said it cost 6,000. However, Han Feng said he needed something longer, preferably with a telescopic sight. Boss Liu was taken aback and asked if he wanted a sniper rifle. He thought it was all absurd and complained, saying they were treating the place like a shopping mall. He emphasized that he only had that pistol, it was take it or leave it. Ziyi then explained that there was a reason behind the request and began telling a story that dated back 5 years, involving Han Feng's wife. At that moment, the scene shifted. Boss Liu appeared angry, saying the whole thing was disgusting. He shouted in outrage upon learning that none of the 3 children were actually Han Feng's, calling it repulsive. Meanwhile, Han Feng was confused, thinking that Ziyi was making up some ridiculous story. Even so, Boss Liu said he would arrange the sniper rifle, but it would take a few days. Han Feng, grateful, made a gesture of thanks. The boss also said he'd deliver a semi-automatic weapon to him, along with plenty of bullets. He even offered the pistol as a gift. Han Feng accepted it while saying that a friend of his, who worked in the government, had warned him. According to him, due to climate changes, the government was preparing to limit the purchase of supplies, so it was better to hurry. Boss Lu understood the situation. Outside, Ziyi commented that the boss seemed to have taken a liking to Han Feng, and that when he was in a good mood, he might even give someone a cannon. Han Feng replied that he'd later buy some cigarettes as a gift for the boss as thanks. Ziyi said it wasn't necessary, that they were just helping each other. But Han Feng insisted, saying it had to be a specific brand since others made him cough too much. He said 7 or 8 boxes would be enough. Now that he had weapons and supplies, Han Feng stated that he was ready to face the first stage of the apocalypse. The next step would be to properly study the special ability he possessed. If he could finally solve the food problem, his chances of survival would increase considerably. However, at that moment, Han Feng was hit by something and fell to the ground. Ziyi, worried, asked if he was okay. But Han Feng replied that he seemed to have fractured his foot and asked to be taken to the hospital. Ziyi explained that he didn't have a driver's license, but still decided to help Han Feng. The two of them took a taxi straight to the hospital. At the hospital, a nurse commented that it was snowing heavily. Then, she received a call informing her there was a staff shortage in the lobby. The head nurse responded that she was already on her way. Meanwhile, Han Feng was lamenting his situation. He had indeed fractured his foot, and right on the eve of the apocalypse. The doctor explained that he would need to remain under observation for at least an hour before receiving the medication and being discharged. While waiting, Ziyi informed him that he was leaving, but told Han Feng to call if he needed anything. Han Feng reflected on how the sudden drop in temperature caused by the snowstorm had led to a spike in accidents, leaving hospitals completely overcrowded. He wondered how much longer it would take before he could finally get his medication. In another area of the hospital, the head nurse named Kim was tending to some patients. Han Feng was surprised to see that someone so young already held such a high responsibility position. Besides her competence and dedication to the patients, she also stood out for her beauty. Unintentionally, his gaze drifted to a part of her body it shouldn't have, and he felt deeply embarrassed. Suddenly, an elderly man sitting near Han Feng called the nurse over. When she approached and asked what was wrong, he said he was having intense back pain. However, she didn't realize he was secretly recording under her clothes. Kim suggested an X-ray to better investigate the cause of the pain, but the old man suddenly stood up, asked her to take a closer look, and grabbed her by the waist, making her visibly uncomfortable. At that moment, Han Feng intervened and struck the man with one of his crutches, knocking him to the ground. He then pretended it was an accident, claiming it was his first time using crutches and that they had slipped from his hands. When he bent down to pick up the man's phone, the man panicked and begged him not to touch it. Once Han Feng saw the contents, he confirmed what he had suspected. He said it was unacceptable that filming the nurse like that was a crime, and that if the man got caught, he'd go straight to jail. He also said he wouldn't return the phone, which made the man furious. He then ran off in a panic. Kim was confused, thinking the man really had back pain. Han Feng wondered if there were still people that naive. He explained that she had been filmed and handed her the phone, saying she could delete the footage or call the police if she wanted to. Grateful, Kim asked if his foot still hurt. It was only then that Han Feng remembered his own injury and fell to the floor, screaming in pain. Kim quickly helped him and said she was the one who should be thankful. She also said she wouldn't let criminals like that man win in the future. Still, the way she exposed herself showed she hadn't truly learned how to protect herself yet. Someone called for the head nurse to report to another area. Before leaving, she reminded Han Feng to change the dressing in a week. But as he said goodbye, Han Feng commented to himself that he probably wouldn't see that nurse again because in a week, everything would be different. The next day, news outlets reported that in the past 24 hours, the temperature had dropped drastically. They stated that extreme cold was happening in several parts of the world. Despite that, experts claimed it was just a temporary phenomenon and that things would return to normal soon. But Han Feng, already at home, didn't trust those words. He believed the authorities were hiding the truth from the public. If he hadn't died in his past life, he might have believed it too. But now, with a second chance, he had prepared well in advance. He had stockpiled a good amount of supplies, reinforced his house against the cold, and secured heating equipment. For now, he didn't need to worry about his own survival. When he checked his phone, he saw that neighbors in the community were commenting about the cold on social media. Among those messages, a mysterious person appeared saying strange things. They claimed that the snowstorm wasn't caused by natural weather, but by something coming from inside the earth. According to them, the frozen apocalypse was approaching. Han Feng was intrigued and began to wonder who that person was. How could they know so much? He decided he needed to keep an eye on them. Suddenly, the scene changed to a depiction with cute little cats illustrating people's behavior during the apocalypse. Everyone was commenting that the snow was intense and the temperature had dropped below -20 degrees Celsius. Many were wondering where the property management was, as they were supposed to be handling the situation. But the staff replied that, due to the snowstorm, manpower was extremely limited. This caused a major uproar. Residents were demanding a refund of the administration fee. But Han Feng, observing it all, found the argument pointless. In his opinion, there was no way to clear that amount of snow with just human effort. Among the residents, a man named Jiang Shui tried to calm the situation. He explained that even if they cleared the snow now, everything would be covered again in a few hours. He suggested that if everyone worked together, they could clear the area more quickly. He also pointed out that the administration staff were just regular people, equally powerless in the face of a natural disaster like this. Despite his attempt to ease tensions, many residents disagreed with him. Some questioned who he thought he was to give his opinion. But Jiang Shuio made it clear that he wasn't part of the administration. He was just stating the facts. He insisted that arguing wouldn't solve anything. People then began to worry about starving. They said they needed to go out and buy food. But Jiang Shuio said that driving to the supermarket was impossible at that moment. And even if the community exit was cleared, there was no guarantee the outside streets would be passable. So, he suggested everyone go on foot. He offered to help clear the path along with other residents. At that moment, Han Feng realized he recognized that voice. He remembered that in his past life, that man had always been very active and helpful in the community. Other residents also began mobilizing. One of them said that anyone who wanted to leave would have to help remove the snow, and those who didn't want to should at least not get in the way. Another added that he would help too, as he had an important meeting for a $1 million project. Little by little, more people volunteered to help, including Han Feng, who also recognized Jiang Shuio. Gradually, unity began to take shape in the face of the imminent crisis. Among the residents, a woman commented that even though she had been sick with a cold over the past few days, if they were going to be led by Jiang Shuio and Wu, then she would also come down to help. When Han Feng heard that, he felt like he recognized that voice. Soon after, several men, visibly smitten, started protesting. They said Hui Na didn't need to make that effort and asked her to stay home and rest a bit. She clearly seemed to be admired by everyone there. Meanwhile, Han Feng thought to himself that Li Hui Na was truly an excellent actress. At that exact moment, he received some messages from her. She reminded him that he had promised to contact her but had disappeared. Still, she said she was waiting for him. She even sent a photo along with the message, saying she missed him. However, Han Feng noticed that she was wearing very little in the photo and concluded that she was trying to seduce him even in that cold. He thought that she really would do anything to win people over and provoke reactions. On the other hand, Li Hui Na, in her own home, was furious. She kicked her phone while shouting that that idiot Han Feng would pay for ignoring her like that. That day marked the third since the snowstorm began. The outside temperature had dropped to -2 degrees Celsius. In the early stages of the apocalypse, there was still internet access, and heating systems were working normally, so people's routines continued somewhat normally. Han Feng spent time watching videos on his phone. Interestingly, he was watching several videos of women dancing, but despite that, he felt bored. He began to think that maybe the hardest part of this apocalypse was dealing with loneliness. He knew that his bone injury would take months to fully heal. With little else to do, he decided to keep watching videos. When he entered the science section, he came across a curious case. A man had jumped from the 15th floor, and after being rescued, the doctor stitched his wounds. The amazing part was that his necrotic organs and bones began to regenerate after the procedure. This caught Han Feng's attention, and he began wondering whether it could really be true or not. Driven by curiosity, he had a sudden idea. He decided to activate his power to try to heal his injured leg. However, the green light that appeared didn't seem to work any immediate miracles. Exhausted, he ended up falling asleep on the couch. During his sleep, he had one of the strangest dreams he had ever experienced. He was dressed like a Native American, riding goats toward paradise. Suddenly, he fell off the goat and hurt his foot. Another goat appeared and started licking the injury. He tried to push it away, but the goat wrapped its tongue around his foot and began shaking it from side to side. He woke up startled, confused by that bizarre dream. Looking at his own foot, he noticed it was glowing with a green light and was completely healed. He began to wonder if his power had acted on its own while he was asleep. To test it, he made a small cut on his finger with a knife. Then, he activated his power again. Observing what happened, he realized he was beginning to understand how that ability worked. Meanwhile, outside, Jiang Shuio was thanking all the residents for their collective effort. An elderly man named Liu Guangyao modestly commented that he hadn't really done that much. All of that had only been possible thanks to the two brothers from the Jin family. One was named Jin Taiwan, and the other Jin Taiwu. While helping clear the area, a girl named Kim Jian ended up slipping and falling. The two brothers helped her up and then began planning to clear the main road. At the same time, Shueya mentioned that the snow was getting heavier and they needed to hurry, as they still had shopping to do later. That's when Mr. Liu mentioned something curious he had heard. According to him, a community resident had been moving a lot of items in recent days, driving a small truck and unloading various goods into his house. Upon hearing that, Shueyu commented that it might just be someone moving, but Mr. Liu insisted, saying he had seen gas tanks and even a fireplace, which looked like preparations for a harsh winter. At that moment, Jin Taiwu reported that the main entrance was already cleared. However, a man named Wu Kuanyu appeared behind them, saying it was interesting to hear that conversation. Before he could continue, he was hit in the neck by a small ball. The one responsible was Liu Yan, who told Wu Kuanyu to stop slacking off and help her. That sparked a small argument between them, as he complained that she only watched while he did everything alone. To avoid further conflict, Shueyu asked them to stop fighting, reminding everyone that the entrance was ready. Soon after, Guangyao asked Shueyu what he thought about that natural disaster. Shuei, who had been very serious until then, changed his expression. He said he wasn't sure either, but thought it was just a temporary snowstorm that would soon pass. Even so, he mentioned that if the blizzard continued, at least there was someone in the community with plenty of supplies. Guangyao agreed and praised Shueyu's intelligence. Then, Shueya organized everyone, asking them to form a line without pushing, and recommended that everyone try to return within 3 hours, as the snow was getting heavier. While all of this was happening, Han Feng was sleeping until he heard knocks at the door. When he opened it, he saw it was Ziyi, who had come to deliver his packages. Han Feng thanked him, and Ziyi took the chance to mention something strange. The supermarket in the Eastern District had been completely emptied overnight. Without giving many details, he said he was busy and left. Han Feng started wondering how they had managed to empty an entire market overnight without making any noise. This reminded him of certain novels he had read, where characters had powers capable of sucking everything into a personal space. He began to question whether someone might have such a spatial ability. Even so, he knew he needed to focus on his own power, which was still a mystery to him. So far, he had noticed that his ability reacted to various food ingredients, but the success rate was extremely low. When testing with soybeans, only 1 in 10 attempts worked. With meat, the results were even worse. Still, he kept experimenting and realized the failure rate was very high. So, he decided he needed to find a new method that same night. Around 10:45 p.m., Han Feng began to understand something important. Each type of food required a specific energy value. If the energy was wrong, the experiment would fail. Interestingly, he found the pattern familiar, similar to a popular dance game where you had to follow commands up, down, left, right, with precision each second. Thinking about this, he concluded that if he could infuse the correct energy at each second, he might achieve the desired result. He also realized there was a critical point in the process and, upon understanding it, he finally achieved a perfect result. After that, he decided to try the same method with meat. However, unlike vegetables, when the meat experiment failed, it turned into an extremely disgusting black liquid. Even so, he believed the principle was the same. He just needed to figure out the correct energy value for meat, which seemed to require more time than vegetables. After countless failed attempts, he realized the difficulty had increased significantly. It took thousands of tests, but in the end, nearly fainting from exhaustion, Han Feng succeeded. And as he collapsed to the ground, drained, he realized he had finally mastered that new method. Elsewhere in the city, breaking news reported that the snowfall was worsening rapidly. The government had started distributing supplies to the affected areas and urged people not to leave their homes unless absolutely necessary. They also warned of the risks, as the power supply was becoming entirely compromised. Seeing that, Han Feng thought that everything was happening again, exactly as it had in his past life. He picked up his phone and noticed that the community group chat was becoming lively. Some residents believed the news, while others didn't take it very seriously. Guangyao then questioned whether people truly believed that kind of report, since he hadn't seen any emergency supply trucks so far. On the contrary, he had heard from a friend that several armored vehicles and war tanks were heading toward the city. That could only mean one thing: there was a real possibility that a war was about to begin. That comment left the entire community in shock. Han Feng then said he remembered hearing something similar in his past life. Shuei agreed, stating that the situation was exactly as Han Feng had described. According to him, it was urgent that everyone take measures to ensure their own survival. Some community members were already running out of food, and there was no forecast for when government supplies would arrive. So, organizing help for those in need was essential. Shuei suggested that those who still had food or supplies begin donating to those in critical condition. As an example, he offered to donate half of his own food, and said anyone could come to his home to take what they needed. Wu Kuanyu supported the idea and said that, in this cold, no one should go hungry. He also took the opportunity to ask whether Li Huina intended to donate anything. She reacted with irony, asking if he was going crazy for asking something like that with so many people around. Wu Kuanyu replied that he was just asking directly, without beating around the bush. Li Huina then accused him of saying that only because she had rejected him in the past. Publicly, she just said she was sorry but didn't have enough food to share. Once again, the men in the community rushed to defend her, as they always did. Despite that, many people began to mobilize to help, donating what they could: clothes, food, or other essential items. Shuei thanked everyone who contributed and emphasized that, at that moment, it it was crucial to choose representatives to organize the distribution. It was as if they were forming their own emergency committee within the community. Watching it all unfold, Han Feng remembered how the same thing had happened in his past life. To him, it was nothing but a trap, a way to make everyone share their supplies only to be betrayed in the end. On the 19th of July, marking the 5th day since the beginning of the apocalypse, the outside temperature reached 40 degrees Celsius. The heating system completely failed due to the extreme cold, and everyone was looking for ways to stay warm. Just like before his rebirth, the situation was about to become unbearable, with the difference that this time, Han Feng was living like a true king. At that moment, Han Feng received a call from a resident of apartment 1801, who was in charge of Building 8. He informed him that in 20 minutes, road clearing would begin, and afterward, everyone should head to the underground parking garage for mandatory check-in. Han Feng became nervous upon hearing that he would have to go outside. He didn't want to. Even so, the next scene showed him already in the first-floor lobby. He thought it wouldn't be wise to burn bridges with the neighbors so early. He needed to maintain good relations and, more importantly, keep the secret of his apartment hidden. Looking around, he noticed the snow had completely blocked off the first floor. Everyone was worried, as they had cleared that area the day before, but the entrance was already buried in snow again, all the way to the top. The neighbors asked Han Feng to help them open the door. When they finally managed to do it, a strong blast of icy wind rushed in, along with snow from the blizzard. The cold had gotten much worse, and no one could even keep their eyes open. Han Feng thought that going outside in such conditions would surely cause serious frostbite. People started saying that if they went out to try to clear the street like that, they'd probably die. But despite the danger, Zi stepped forward. He called everyone there a bunch of scared kittens and said he would do it himself. Han Feng asked Zi not to push himself so hard, since the weather was extremely dangerous. But Zi, being stubborn and impulsive, walked right into the blizzard without hesitation. However, his bravery didn't last long. Not long after, they had to pull him back in a rush. He was so purple from the cold that he looked like an eggplant. Given the severity of the situation, everyone was moved to the underground parking garage. It became clear that the volume of snow couldn't be cleared by human effort alone. The only option was to wait for the storm to pass. Shueya then said there wasn't much to be done at the moment except wait. Curiously, someone noticed a strange bracelet on Shueya's arm, but no one commented directly on it. He took the opportunity to announce that the underground garage would become the official location for donations and supply distribution. Meanwhile, Han Feng wondered if that emergency committee they were forming wasn't actually a scam to control the residents' resources. Even so, Shueyu thanked everyone for the many donations they had made. The help would be essential in saving many people in need. Some residents, moved, said they would overcome that difficult phase together. But Han Feng thought differently. In his mind, it was clear that once the disaster didn't go away, many would regret trusting so much. During the movement in the basement, Han Feng ended up recognizing a woman. It was the nurse who had treated him earlier. As she carried several boxes, she tripped and nearly fell. He rushed to catch her just in time and asked if she was okay. That's when she recognized him as her patient and was surprised to see him standing, considering his injury. Han Feng replied that, since childhood, he had an incredible healing ability and that normal sprains would heal in just a few days. Kim, innocent and kind, believed his explanation. When he offered to help her carry the boxes, she initially refused, saying they were very heavy. But Han Feng, wanting to thank her for wrapping his foot, insisted. She eventually gave in. However, when he lifted the box, he almost collapsed from how heavy it was. Surprised, he asked what was inside. She explained that it was medical supplies to be donated. Even so, she asked Han Feng not to overdo it, saying she was stronger than most men. He then asked if she had always been that strong. Kim changed the subject, saying there were reasons for it, but she couldn't explain them on her own. Right after, she realized she didn't even know his name. Han Feng introduced himself, and she said her name was Kim, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Curious, she asked what he did for a living. He replied that he was unemployed, which surprised her. He then asked what was wrong with just being unemployed. That's when a distracted man bumped into her, causing her to fall straight into Han Feng's arms. The situation made him visibly embarrassed. At that exact moment, Li Huina appeared. Seeing the scene, she got straight to the point, asking why he didn't tell her he had left, and grabbing his arm, demanding to know who the friend he was with was. Kim, feeling uncomfortable, quickly grabbed her boxes and walked away, thanking Han Feng for the help before leaving. He then asked Li Huina what she was doing there. She explained that she had come down to get supplies and ran into him by chance. She took the opportunity to say she was worried, since he hadn't contacted her in days. Trying to play it off, Han Feng said he was just about to message her. Suspicious, Li Huina said it was obvious he was lying, since she had just seen him smiling and chatting with another girl. Still, she changed the subject and asked if he had any spare food, since she was running low at home. Awkwardly, Han Feng replied that he didn't have much, but he could share a bit. He took the opportunity to ask why she hadn't responded to his messages, as he had asked a few days ago if she wanted to spend some time with him. Embarrassed, she said she hadn't really understood what he meant. Finally, she added that if he wanted to talk, he could find her online anytime. Hearing that, Han Feng, slightly frustrated, said that since she wasn't going to agree anyway, he'd just leave. Quickly, Hui Na pulled Han Feng aside and said he had changed a lot lately. She said she took relationships seriously and didn't want people thinking she was with him just because of his money. If it were in the past, back when Han Feng died the first time, he would have believed her without question. But now, all he wanted was to rip off the mask she wore. Still, he held himself back because he knew there was something more important to figure out: who the man was that had killed him in his previous life. That's when he realized he didn't need to go looking for that man. All he had to do was repeat exactly what he had done in his past life, and the man would eventually appear. Right after that, Han Feng changed his tone with Hui Na, pretending to be lighthearted. He said he was just joking and that he'd be waiting for her answer. He promised to bring her some food the next day. Hui Na responded, saying Han Feng was the best, and that if he ever needed anything, he could reach her online. But when she said goodbye, she gave a sinister smile, completely unaware of the plans Han Feng was scheming. Later, somewhere else, Han Feng was eating a huge plate of food and praised the meal, saying the place was excellent. In recent days, he had been conducting experiments with his ability, which led him to two important conclusions. First, the meat he created didn't grow indefinitely. Second, it could be recycled endlessly, just like the soybeans. Before, whenever he grew bean sprouts, he would split the soybeans half to produce new sprouts, and the other half for consumption. Now, he tried applying the same method to meat. He took half a piece of meat, added some soybeans, and managed to regenerate a full portion. He repeated the process several times until he confirmed it worked consistently. That meant he no longer had to worry about food. Meanwhile, a television news report announced it was the 2nd of August, marking 19 days since the beginning of the snowstorm. The reporter was in the Maldives, 78 kilometers from the equator, reporting that the average temperature had dropped to an astonishing 4.2 degrees Celsius. The entire island was practically swallowed by snow, the sea had completely frozen, and the ice was 55 centimeters thick. The disaster was spreading to countries near the equator, but Han Feng knew the actual situation was far worse than the media claimed. Suddenly, he heard an explosion. Looking out the window, he realized it was the 7th explosion in recent days. He wondered what was really going on out there. When he looked up, he saw several military helicopters flying over the area. The situation outside was causing panic among the residents of the condo. Many were exchanging food supplies, but some apartment owners were extorting those in need, and fights were breaking out. Despite that, one organized group had announced that any struggling property owners would be invited to receive supplies for free. Then, Han Feng decided to go out and investigate what was happening. The cold was intense, but he endured it just long enough to gather some information. In his past life, he remembered a major conflict in that community. But as he observed the current situation, he realized that the group was indeed distributing supplies, and so far, there were no signs of fraud. At that moment, Han Feng was still trying to fully understand what was happening. It appeared that they were handing out supplies, but chaos was inevitable. One angry man began shouting, saying he had donated several boxes to the committee, but in return, he was receiving only a minimal amount of food. XUEU tried to calm the situation, explaining that the supplies were being distributed equally among everyone. Even so, the man demanded that his donations be returned immediately. XUEU said that wasn't possible, as the resources had already been allocated to the collective, and asked him to consider the situation as a whole. He promised that, once the disaster was over, he would repay him double. But the man replied that he had no idea how long the storm would last. He just wanted back what was his. Some people in the group began defending XUEU, telling the man to accept the food he was getting and just leave. To Han Feng, it was clear that there was no way that man would get his supplies back in such a chaotic situation. Soon after, ZYI appeared and greeted Han Feng with a tired expression. Han Feng was surprised to see him there, as it had been a long time since they last met. ZYI said he was fine, just weakened. He shared that, in recent days, he had survived on water alone and had donated nearly all his supplies to the committee, believing he was helping the neighbors. However, he received very little food in return and now had nothing left. And with the storm still ongoing, there was no sign of improvement. Han Feng leaned closer and whispered, asking if ZIYI could do him a favor. The young man agreed right away, but joked that he'd only do it in exchange for 4 packs of noodles. Han Feng replied that he shouldn't underestimate that offer. He was also running low on food. At that moment, ZIYI began crying, touched, saying he knew that was just an excuse for Han Feng to give him food for free. He promised he'd never forget that kindness. So Han Feng told him to come by his house later to get the supplies. ZYI thanked him and said he would stop by. To Han Feng, that help ended his need to leave the house to gather information. As bad as he felt for Ziyi's situation, he knew nothing was more important now than staying safe indoors. However, he barely had time to relax. Suddenly, Chuina appeared, furious, and slapped him across the face. She said she was deeply disappointed in him and demanded to know why he hadn't replied to her messages. Han Feng could hardly believe he had been slapped again, especially when he hadn't even had a chance to explain himself. But Huina insisted, asking if he was deaf. Trying to stay calm, Han Feng apologized and said he had been robbed. He explained that he had left the supplies at his door for a moment while he went to get his keys, and when he came back, everything was gone. Huina then asked if he still had any food left. He said he was eating only once a day, and that his reserves wouldn't last much longer. But to his surprise, she thought that was great. She said that if he started eating only once every 2 days, he could share half with her. That way, they could face the disaster together. Han Feng was stunned. In her eyes, he was just a tool, someone useful in a moment of need. Still, as promised, he said he would share his food with her and would message her later, after organizing his things. Huina said goodbye, saying she'd wait for that message. Changing scenes, Huina once again wondered what Han Feng was doing. She couldn't accept that he kept ignoring her messages and felt she couldn't be abandoned by him again. The building's elevator was down, so Huina had to take the stairs. She complained to herself, saying that if it weren't for the supplies, she would never have made that effort. She was exhausted, weak, hungry, and struggling to keep pace. She was close to reaching Han Feng's floor, but everything was dark because the lights were broken. Along the way, a bag of trash fell on her head, making her mood even worse. Even so, she kept going until she finally reached Han Feng's door. He said he had fallen asleep and didn't see her messages. He explained that, because it was dark, he bumped into the handrail and knocked everything over. Huina, annoyed, called Han Feng a pig, but inside, he thought he had set all that up especially for her. Then he handed her a bag and said those were the last supplies he had left. When Huina opened the bag, she saw everything was moldy. Han Feng apologized, saying that was all he had. She asked if they could even eat that, and he said if she didn't want it, she could return it. But she quickly pulled the bag back, saying she never said she didn't want it. At that moment, he started to wonder if this was really the goddess he had once been so enchanted by. Huina remarked that the outside part looked bad, but the inside still seemed okay. She grabbed a knife and began scraping off the mold, determined to make use of the food. Without hesitation, she also took the flour right out of Han Feng's hand. As he watched her walk away, he thought that garbage was enough to cause serious diarrhea for days, and with the freezing weather, she wouldn't even be able to take a proper shower. While walking through the hallways, Han Feng noticed someone was following him. He hid and surprised the person from behind, threatening them by saying they were dead. But as he got closer, he saw it was a girl. Surprised, he asked why she was following him. He warned that if she didn't say anything, he'd strip her right there despite the cold. Since she remained silent, he said he'd let it go this time but told her to stop playing that kind of game. The girl, however, pulled on Han Feng's coat. He asked her to stop staring at him like that, but she persisted and pointed in a direction. He asked if she wanted him to follow her. When they arrived at her room, Han Feng was surprised. She had stored a large quantity of supplies, all neatly organized. That could only mean she had known about the snow disaster in advance. The girl confirmed. She said she had done calculations and the results indicated an ice age. She also said she had posted about it in the message group. Han Feng realized she was the mysterious person he had suspected. He asked why she brought him there, and she pointed to her television. On the screen were images from various cameras around the building. She had seen everything he had done and was scared. He asked if she had been monitoring him from the beginning. As she took off her clothes, the girl confirmed that she had. Embarrassed, Han Feng asked why she was undressing, and she replied that the room was just too warm. Later, Han Feng reflected on what had happened. She had started to suspect him because of his hoarding behavior, and began watching him. She wanted to know if there was a chance for cooperation between them. Suddenly, the girl climbed on top of him, saying she wanted to learn how to use the generator. He taught her how to operate it, and asked if there was anything else. She pointed to another item. Han Feng spent most of the day helping with tasks around her place. When they finally stopped, they sat down to eat. He felt like he was working as a full-time babysitter. The girl had almost no practical life skills and absolutely no common sense. She was so tired she ended up falling asleep in the middle of the meal. To him, it felt like taking care of a child. The next day, when it was time to leave, she gifted him several boxes. He said it was too much and asked if she wanted something in return. She replied that all she wanted was for him to teach her how to use the equipment again. After a few days living with her, Han Feng concluded that the girl was completely useless in daily life, and on top of that, totally clueless. Even though she was determined to learn, the girl simply couldn't make any progress. Han Feng looked at the food she had prepared and, trying to stay positive, mentally noted that at least it had improved a little. Then he realized he still didn't know her name, so he asked. Without hesitation, the girl replied that her name was Master of the Evil Eye. Han Feng, not wanting to argue, simply ignored the absurd answer. Meanwhile, in the building, the atmosphere was growing more and more tense. Many people had started fighting over the few remaining supplies. Amid the chaos, XUAU activated the building's central speaker and said he had endured enough. He wanted to know if they really thought it was right to be fighting over food at that moment. The crowd reacted poorly, asking if he really had the nerve to say that, considering he was the one who had suggested donating the supplies. Even so, XUAU tried to remain calm. He asked for patience, saying the donated food wasn't much, but no one deserved to starve. He reminded them that, in the beginning, a loaf of bread that originally cost just a few won was being sold for dozens or even hundreds by people who already had plenty. A simple piece of bread was cut into 10 parts and auctioned off, and even then, those people managed to make a fortune during the disaster. To him, it was absurd. He said that, in the end, they would all starve to death if things continued that way. XUEU stated that the only solution was to unite. He encouraged everyone to go upstairs and take back the supplies that were rightfully theirs. The crowd began to agree. They realized they were suffering while others profited from the tragedy. According to XUEU, the fault lay with the community itself for staying silent until now. And so, they all decided to take the food back by force. ZYI, who had been observing everything, was frightened by how things were unfolding. He quickly sent a message to Han Feng, warning that people had completely lost it and were now planning to invade the apartments. He said XUEU was leading the revolt and encouraging people to break locks. He also warned that everyone was armed and begged Han Feng not to try to face them alone. Immediately, Han Feng locked the door and shut all the windows. He hadn't expected things to escalate this far. Even though he had 2 weapons on hand, he knew this was an organized action, and he wouldn't be able to handle them all. Plus, he couldn't let them discover his own stash. So, he began modifying the room to hide everything, camouflaging his supplies and preparing the space to avoid drawing attention. But suddenly, the power went out across the entire building. Han Feng's room was plunged into darkness, and panic spread among the residents. The outage had been anticipated. With the snowstorm, energy consumption for heating had skyrocketed. To Han Feng, it was inevitable sooner or later it would happen. He also knew that with such low temperatures, repairing the systems would be impossible. He believed that the loss of power and internet might be permanent, and once the residents realized there would be no more signal or calls, the panic would turn much more violent. Half an hour earlier, HUINA was eating instant noodles with a man. He proudly told her that he had bought supplies from several residents at 50 times the normal price. He said he did it so those poor bastards in the group would shut up. He had spent over 500,000 on in supplies, and still managed to auction some of it off, selling to desperate survivors. He was proud of the profit he had made off others' suffering. He believed that with all that, HUINA would be entirely his. But in the middle of the night, he heard voices outside the door. He began to wonder what was happening at such a late hour. When Han Feng approached the door to listen, he realized some people were trying to break it down. Soon, several armed invaders forced their way into his home. However, he had already prepared for this kind of situation, and was setting up a trap for anyone who dared cross the threshold. That was when the strange girl showed up, asking for help. As Han Feng was about to open the door, he was struck by memories of his past life and hesitated. He recalled betrayals and danger, so he told the girl that with so many people stealing supplies, he couldn't let her in. Upon hearing this, she simply sat silently in front of the door without insisting. Concerned, Han Feng asked her to run away quickly, as others were approaching and could hurt her. She could already hear heavy footsteps drawing near, but just as the men reached her, the girl had vanished. That was because Han Feng, acting on impulse, opened the door at the last second and pulled her inside to keep her from being harmed. Moments later, the men began pounding aggressively on Han Feng's door, trying to force their way in. He told the girl to stay calm. The door was well reinforced. The invaders commented on the door's strength and decided to try breaking into the apartment next door instead. Han Feng, relieved, thought to himself that it was a good thing he had reinforced his door in time. Once the immediate danger had passed, he let the girl go, a bit embarrassed, and asked if she was okay. She timidly thanked him for his help. Then, Han Feng mentioned that once he finished installing the system he was planning, anyone who touched his door would be electrocuted. He added that even if he explained how it worked, she probably wouldn't understand. However, the girl showed unexpected technical knowledge. She said that, for the system to work, it just needed electrical current and a voltage difference. Han Feng was surprised and asked how she knew that. She explained that it was simple. After a power outage, all you had to do was wrap an exposed wire around the doorknob, connect a ground wire to the breaker box, and then activate the system with a button. Han Feng followed her instructions and, to his surprise, it worked perfectly. Intrigued, he asked how she knew how to do that. The girl replied that her evil eye allowed her to see the truth behind things. Once again, Han Feng chose to ignore the strange comment. He said that if she needed help, she should call him, as he was busy. But the girl declared that from that moment on, she would live with him. Han Feng, surprised by the statement, asked if she was joking, and startled, ended up tripping and falling to the ground. As he fell, his hand turned purple after touching something soft and strange. He wondered what kind of purple light that was. Looking around, he saw his toolbox in a bizarre state. Even the hammer looked melted. That scared him, as it was clear someone had been in his house watching his actions and abilities. The girl then revealed that he too was a messenger, chosen by the master of the evil eye. Trying to remain calm, Han Feng pretended he knew all about that and claimed to be a hidden subordinate. He added that strange phenomena were common around him because of it. In his mind, he thought her logic was so crazy that he might be able to fool her easily. However, the girl said that since they were both messengers, they should support one another. Therefore, the room should be shared between the two of them. Before Han Feng could protest or say anything, she had already invaded the room and settled in like it was perfectly normal. Despite everything that had happened, Han Feng was still curious about the strange purple light that had appeared in his hand. He realized that he might not have just two lights, but more ones that hadn't awakened yet. He began reflecting on the exact moment the purple light had appeared, when he had tripped over a wire and tried to recreate that sensation. As he focused, the purple light emerged again in his hand. Intrigued, Han Feng began testing the light on objects around him. When he touched a machete with the purple energy, the blade began to soften, as if it had lost all its structure. He tried applying the same effect to other items, and they all became just as soft, as if the resistance of each material was gradually being undone. He noticed that the longer he used the purple light, the weaker and more pliable the objects became. Still, he thought the effect was of little use, until an idea struck him. What if he combined the purple light with the green one? When he combined the two energies, he discovered something surprising. The knife that had been soft returned to a solid and rigid state. That led him to conclude that the fusion of the lights could alter the density and hardness of materials, allowing him to control their structure precisely. The resulting resistance, however, seemed above normal, which sparked even more ideas about how he could use it. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, a group of men argued among themselves. One of them suggested they return the supplies they had stolen, but another refused, claiming he didn't even have enough for himself, so they would keep everything secret. But then something strange began to happen. The wall near them started to twist unnaturally, as if it were alive. A grotesque face emerged from the middle of the wall, and the sight was so terrifying that the men dropped everything and fled in panic. On the other side, Han Feng observed the results of his experiment and told himself that, although it was a lot of work, creating an entire wall using that power was worth it. He wanted to test how resistant it had become. So he struck the wall with a hammer, but the impact caused absolutely no damage. That confirmed the result had far exceeded his expectations, leaving him impressed by his own progress. Meanwhile, one of the men involved in the theft was justifying his actions, claiming that the residents were starving and that he had only gathered those supplies to help his own family. At that moment, Tywin suddenly appeared, restraining the man and demanding to know where he had hidden the rest of the food. Since he had seen with his own eyes the man taking 3 bags but handing over only one, the accused tried to deny it, swearing he had given everything. Before Tywin could lose his temper and hit him, Shueyu stepped in and grabbed his arm, saying that before making any decision, he wanted to talk to the man. Tywin backed off, saying the man had gotten lucky for now. Shueyu then extended his hand and calmly asked if the man was okay. Later, the man was seen retrieving the food he had hidden. With tears in his eyes, he explained that he had a family of 5 and felt he had to save something. Moved by the story, Shueyu gave the man his own share of food. He said he understood that rules existed, but that he was also touched by human situations. The gesture made the man break down in tears, promising that if they ever needed him, they just had to ask. After that, Shueyu asked all the other residents to return home and calmly collect their supplies. Still curious, Tywin asked how he had convinced the man to give back what he had hidden. Shueyu explained that he simply tried to understand the reason behind the man's actions. He said that throughout the history of Country M, many riots and conflicts had arisen due to social inequality, but such acts were classified as collective behavior, and as long as no one was caught red-handed, participants were rarely punished. He had merely explained to the man that by breaking breaking the rules, he was setting himself against the community, would be seen only as a thief, and might end up being punished by the very people he stole from. Guang Yao, who was watching everything, remarked that behind many unruly groups, there was usually a leader responsible for organizing the chaos. And in the midst of chaos, sometimes heroes emerge. In his opinion, that boy, Shuiyu, was certainly not someone ordinary. While reinforcing the entire structure of his house with the materials he still had, Han Feng heard a noise outside. At first, he thought it might just be a neighbor trying to steal supplies. But when he peeked through a crack in the door, he saw it was Hui Na. She was standing there, saying she couldn't betray his feelings and that hardship revealed true love. Those words sent a chill down Han Feng's spine. They were exactly the same words she had said the day she killed him in his past life. That couldn't be a coincidence. If Hui Na was there, then the other man, the one who had helped kill him, must also be nearby. Han Feng ran to grab his weapon, feeling that this was the moment he had waited for so long. But when he tried to activate any equipment, he realized the power was out. That put him at a disadvantage. If he couldn't neutralize them in a single blow, he risked being counterattacked. He also considered using his electric trap, but for it to work, both targets would need to grab the handle at the same time, which was impossible to coordinate. Moreover, he wasn't even sure if the trap would work as expected. Because of that, he decided he needed to assess the situation carefully. The real threat wasn't Hui Na, but the man who was surely lurking in the shadows. He had to pinpoint the exact location of that man before opening the door. Then he remembered that, in his past life, the man used to hide in a blind spot just behind the door. It was possible he was there again. With that assumption, Han Feng activated his purple light ability, believing it might give him an advantage. Outside, the hidden man asked Hui Na if all that effort was really worth it because of Han Feng. She replied that he still had supplies, reminding him that Han Feng had bought a truck full of goods on the day of the disaster. With that amount, they would have enough food for several days. While they were talking, the man was suddenly struck by an attack from Han Feng, who used the purple ability to strike through the wall. Hui Na, not understanding what had just happened, was caught off guard. At that moment, Han Feng forcefully opened the door and used a fire extinguisher to attack Hui Na, pushing her away. When she looked down, she saw her partner completely defeated. Terrified, she ran off at full speed without looking back. The other man, trying to escape as well, was kicked by Han Feng, who stopped him from getting up. Desperate, the intruder begged him to stop and asked if he even knew who his father was. But Han Feng completely ignored the threat and kept beating him, saying he didn't care. Even while being beaten, the man claimed he held no grudge against Han Feng, but that didn't stop him. Han Feng wanted to know why they had tried to kill him. And just as the man was about to answer, Han Feng shouted that he didn't want to hear excuses. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a baseball bat with nails and killed the man on the spot, allowing no explanations. Soon after, the adrenaline wore off and reality hit him. Han Feng returned to his senses, his stomach churning. He dropped to his knees, vomiting on the floor. When he looked up, he saw the girl standing there, calmly watching everything. She asked softly if he needed help. Back inside the apartment, Han Feng couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. What disturbed him most was the fact that the girl showed no fear at all in the face of that brutal and bloody scene. That made him begin to fear her presence. He told her those men might come back seeking revenge and that she should leave as soon as possible. But the girl replied without hesitation that she would stay with him. Still worried, Han Feng insisted that staying was dangerous and that both of them could end up dead if they continued down that path. Despite Han Feng's repeated insistence that she should leave for her own safety, she calmly replied that there was no need to worry. She said the master of the evil eye would protect them and explained that the eye's energy had run out, so she would be entering a state of suspension. However, disturbed by those strange explanations, Han Feng grabbed her arm firmly and said he didn't want to hear any more crazy answers like that. Even so, she asked him to follow her to the bedroom. When Han Feng entered and saw what was inside, he was completely shocked, with an expression similar to Saitama's before he lost his hair. That was how stunned he was by the scene before him. Meanwhile, outside, many residents were lining up to get supplies. Hui Na watched everything with a distant gaze, thinking about the man who hadn't returned all night. That puzzled her, especially since she couldn't understand how Han Feng had managed to set up that trap in advance. But what bothered her most was the fact that, when Han Feng opened the door to his apartment, a faint light shone from inside along with a gentle wave of heat. That meant he had some source of power still working, which also indicated that he had prepared for the snow disaster long ago. It was very likely that he had secretly stockpiled a large amount of supplies. Hui Na began to feel increasingly resentful at the thought. She felt that while he was hoarding quality food, he had only given her scraps, and that made her furious. Determined, she concluded that she needed to find out what was inside that apartment. no matter what. While walking, she ended up bumping into a man in the lobby. He recognized her and mentioned that a fire had been lit in Building 5. Huina tried to step away politely, saying she just wanted to return home, but the man grabbed her arm and insisted she come to his place, saying he had plenty of food and that he had always liked women like her. Uncomfortable, Huina pulled away and replied that she didn't like trash. The man, irritated, accused her of pretending and said she was secretly trying to claim supplies. He added that everyone had already noticed what she was doing. Some people nearby overheard the accusation and began murmuring among themselves, saying she was behind the whole scheme. Trying to defend herself, Huina slapped the man in the face and demanded he let go of her. However, just as he raised his arm to retaliate, he was suddenly struck by a powerful slap that threw him to the ground. Everyone stood stunned, unable to understand how the man had been thrown like that. The one responsible for the blow was Jian, who had appeared suddenly and protectively. She approached and asked Huina if she was okay, if she was hurt. Still shaken, Huina replied that she was fine. Jian then handed her a card, saying that if she ever felt unsafe, she could come to her. But the man who had been hit, furious, got up and tried to go after Kim, saying she had no right to do that to him. The moment he raised his arm to strike her, Ziyi intervened, grabbing the aggressor and slamming him to the ground with force. He firmly stated that he hated men who hit women. Even so, other men watching the scene started turning against Huina, saying she had been seen trying to fraudulently claim supplies. They also alleged that she was involved with that rich man, who had earlier been accused of manipulating food and supply prices. Shueyu stepped in and grabbed the man who had started the commotion, firmly asking who he thought he was to act like that. He said everyone's duty there was to make sure no one went hungry. Hearing this, the man lowered his head and apologized. Maintaining his composure, Shueyu said that next time, he should just walk away and avoid causing trouble. Then, he apologized to those around, especially Huina, for the fear she had experienced in that situation. He then turned to Ziyi and asked if he would consider joining the group to help with supply distribution. Ziyi, however, firmly declined. He said he wasn't interested in joining a group that, in his view, stole from others. He'd rather starve than support that kind of behavior. Another person also spoke up, saying they couldn't agree with that method either, but if there were any injured patients, they could help with medical care. While everyone was talking, Huina approached Shui and asked if she could join him. She confessed she had secretly admired him for a long time and thought now was a good chance for them to be together. But Shueya was blunt in saying she was mistaken. He explained that to be part of the group, one had to be useful, one could fight, another could heal. Then he asked what exactly she could do. He said, in his opinion, Huina wasn't valuable enough to be recruited. Feeling cornered, she revealed that she knew where hidden supplies were. This revelation caught Shueyu off guard, as he hadn't expected such an answer from her. Meanwhile, back at Han Feng's apartment, the mysterious girl was pulling various objects out of a dimensional space. Han Feng was already growing impatient, especially when she pulled out a completely random mannequin. That wasn't what he had asked for, and the situation was getting out of control. In short, the girl had the ability to store any kind of item within a personal subspace. From the center of her chest, she could open a black hole that absorbed everything in its path. Han Feng, increasingly nervous, said that if she didn't find the right item soon, his house would be buried under all that mess. He remarked that storing things was easy, the problem was finding them later. To make matters worse, the girl's accuracy when looking for items was extremely low. Curious, Han Feng asked why it was so hard to find anything inside that black hole. The question sounded strange out of context, but he kept insisting. The girl replied that she hadn't fully explored the internal space yet, as it was far too vast. Then Han Feng, driven by curiosity, asked if he could stick his head inside the black hole to see what it looked like inside. She simply agreed, saying he could try. Without thinking much, Han Feng put his head into the dimensional space and was completely shocked by what he saw. The interior was enormous, much larger than he could have imagined. It was so vast that finding anything in there seemed impossible. Now he understood how she had managed to empty out the market overnight using that ability. However, trying to locate a single object in that chaos was like looking for a needle in a haystack. In a short time, Han Feng started running out of air and quickly pulled his head back out in a panic. As soon as he was out, he yelled at her, asking why she hadn't warned him there was no oxygen inside. His face was tense, as if his skin were about to explode at any moment. But just then, the girl said she had finally found what he was looking for. Still gasping for air, Han Feng was in disbelief, wondering if that item even truly existed. But before he could react, another pile of objects fell on top of him, leaving him even more confused. He looked around, dazed, and could only say, "What the hell was that?" Meanwhile, some men were discussing the 18th floor. They commented that there was something wrong with that place and expressed fear of going up there, saying they didn't want to encounter the monster again. Even so, one of them reminded the others that Mr. Shui had trusted them, and therefore, they could not let him down. On the other side, Han Feng was watching everything through the cameras that had been installed, and announced that he was initiating Plan B. He knew he needed to time each step precisely. As the men began to climb, they suddenly heard a noise. Soon after, several carts approached and exploded, releasing red smoke bombs toward them. Right after that, a drone appeared and began dropping additional bombs on the men. However, one of them managed to hit it. The girl in charge of controlling it warned that she had lost command of the device and could no longer stabilize it. After a brief sequence of effects similar to fireworks, she regained control and reported that the drone had successfully landed outside a window on one of the building's floors. Han Feng replied that he would retrieve the drone immediately, since it was essential to the group. However, the girl commented that she had found a body on the stairs. When Han Feng went to check, he discovered it was Ziyi. He was confused, unable to understand why the boy was there, and began to suspect that he might have stolen from someone. He then told the girl that he had the key and would leave, but asked her not to open the door for anyone else. Before he departed, she handed him a radio and asked him to keep the communication open. Han Feng thanked her, grabbed a gun, and remarked that he hoped he wouldn't have to use it. As he descended the floors, he remained connected to the girl via the radio. He explained that, according to the drone's measurements, the external temperature was minus 49.8 degrees Celsius, and that any human being without proper protection would freeze to death in less than 30 minutes. He also stated that Ziyi's condition could be very serious. The scene then shifts to Shui, who was coordinating the distribution of supplies. At that moment, Hui Na approached and asked if she could join the group. However, Shuya answered no, since there was still no confirmation that the previous incident had not been caused by someone close to her. He added that, if it hadn't been for Guangyao defending Hui Na, he himself wouldn't have believed a single word she said. Even so, he declared that, regardless of whether her information was true or false, he expected her to prove her worth during that operation. Hui Na understood the message, grabbed a gun, and said she was ready. Shueyu then ordered everyone to stay alert and follow him. As they climbed the stairs, they found Ziyi unconscious. As soon as they gave him some water, he woke up screaming, saying he was very hot. When he realized who had rescued him, he claimed that he had been very unlucky. Taiwan grew irritated and asked why he was complaining even though he had been saved. But Ziyi replied that he would never thank people who stole from others. Taiwan called Ziyi an idiot, but was interrupted by Shui, who preferred to maintain order at that moment. Shueyu stated that he would once again invite Ziyi to join the group, as he believed that only by working as a team could they survive that disaster. However, Ziyi immediately rejected the idea, saying he would never join them. Shueyu explained that perhaps Ziyi was misunderstanding everything, because his intention in inviting him was due to his strength, which could be used to help the weaker ones and give hope to those still struggling to survive. Even so, Ziyi remained firm in his decision. He said he knew exactly what Shueyu was doing, and accused him of feeding the elderly only once every 3 days, which, in his eyes, was the same as letting them die slowly. Since he had no father, he stated that this method would not work on him. During this conversation, Han Feng was listening silently. Hearing Ziyi's words, he began to realize that Shueyu might really not care about others, and that if things continued that way, the committee would eventually fall into conflict. At that moment, Taiwan lost his patience, and angrily asked whether Ziyi would join the group or not, making it clear that if he didn't, he should step aside. The argument grew more intense when Ziyi headbutted Taiwan, causing the others to prepare to attack him. Even surrounded, Ziyi declared that he was not afraid of any of them. Han Feng, watching everything, recognized that the situation was very bad. Judging by Ziyi's physical condition, it looked like he could collapse at any moment. Even so, he knew he couldn't just stand by. Despite the many people present, he could not abandon someone who had helped him so many times. Gathering his courage, Han Feng grabbed his gun, thought for a moment, and fired a shot that whizzed right past Taiwan. He declared that if anyone moved, he would shoot for real. Hui Na was shocked, wondering how he dared to walk out of the room armed like that. But Han Feng acted with determination, handing the key to his apartment to Ziyi and telling him to get there as quickly as possible. He also demanded that everyone drop their weapons. The others obeyed. Han Feng then reinforced that he would not hesitate to shoot if anyone tried to stop his escape. With that, he and Ziyi managed to get away. After the two had left, Shiruyu asked if anyone there knew that man. Hui Na replied that his name was Han Feng and explained that they were heading to his apartment. Taiwan, irritated, questioned why she hadn't mentioned before that he had a gun? Huina answered that it was the first time she had ever seen that as well. Shueyu said he believed her and added that if Han Feng really had a gun, he surely also had a lot of supplies. Perhaps he was the one responsible for manipulating food prices. He also began to suspect that Han Feng was the man previously spotted by Guang Yao. Taiwan asked if they were really going to continue with that plan, considering Han Feng could shoot anyone at any time. But Shueyu replied that if he truly wanted to kill someone, he would have done it already. He said he didn't believe Han Feng could hide forever, and suggested that everyone go back to prepare better. Once they were ready, they would return, since it was necessary to act quickly to take down 1,804. Meanwhile, Han Feng and Ziyi were already returning to the apartment. When Ziyi opened the door, he was startled by the warmth inside. Upon entering, he was shocked at what he saw. There were heaters and even a working power generator. Ziyi's eyes widened at the sight of all those supplies, and he asked how Han Feng had managed to set all of that up. At that moment, the girl appeared, asking where the drone was. Han Feng, visibly embarrassed, admitted that he had forgotten about it. The scene then moved forward 2 hours, with Ziyi stating that Han Feng was truly incredible for having predicted the snowstorm. Han Feng approached and apologized for not being honest from the start. Even so, Ziyi stood up, bowed before him, and thanked him for everything he had done, saying that if it weren't for him, he would certainly have starved to death. But Han Feng asked him not to say that, since he himself had also received a lot of help from Ziyi along the way. With tears welling up in his eyes, Ziyi began to cry, saying that Han Feng was truly a good person. He then remarked that many things had changed since the beginning. He asked if Han Feng remembered the message he had sent about the power outage, and explained that from that day on, Shueya had begun trying to steal supplies from the other residents. Some obeyed his orders, but others, like him, refused to follow that path. After a few people distanced themselves, Shueya began to act as if he didn't care, but secretly ordered Taiwan to deal with those he considered a threat, under the pretext of reducing risks. Hearing this, Han Feng commented that it now made sense why the property committee had grown so quickly, as they had been relying on dirty methods to gain power. He knew that dealing with Shou would be anything but easy. Ziyi then smiled and said there was a saying, "What goes around comes around." He asked Han Feng to guess who they had messed with. It was none other than Li Zhenggao, the middleweight boxing champion. Han Feng concluded that they had probably all been beaten badly, and Ziyi confirmed it. He recounted that, although that had happened, Shueya cared far too much about his own reputation, and therefore never admitted defeat. Even so, the people influenced by him still tried to resist Zhenggao's group, but all of them ended up being crushed. As a result, Zhenggao gained many followers, including 2 well-known names. One was Zheng Yongyu, who had once been just a fan of Zheng Hao, but joined him after learning he had fought for years in underground matches, being recognized for his speed. The other was Jin Zhongzai, a man gifted with astonishing natural strength, with a body so tough it seemed monstrous. With Zhenggao, Zheng Yongyu, and Jin Zhongzai together, a powerful force was formed within the complex. They fought against Shueyu's hypocrisy, who, even so, kept trying to steal their supplies. Ziyi revealed that, before fainting, he had overheard that this group was on their way to steal Han Feng's resources. Upon hearing this, Han Feng realized the situation was becoming even more critical. At that moment, the two heard a noise coming from outside. Checking the security cameras, the girl remarked that someone was approaching. Han Feng quickly stood up and said he was going to electrify the door, but she interrupted him, saying she could smell a strong scent of sulfur in the air. Right after, an explosion struck the place, knocking everyone to the ground. The girl warned that they were using very powerful explosives. When they looked back at the cameras, they saw Huina talking with Shueyu, which made Han Feng suspect that she had been the one who betrayed them. Han Feng ordered everyone to step away from the door, and then activated the electricity, shocking one of the people trying to force it. Outside, Shueyu gave the order to install explosives at the junction between the door and the wall. After the detonation, they realized the door was still intact, with only a few cracks around the wall. Shueyu concluded that Han Feng had taken precautionary security measures and decided to increase the force. He instructed his men to use a charge of 3 combined explosives to target a specific spot. If that didn't work, they were to keep increasing the power, because that day they were going to break into his home no matter what. Meanwhile, the explosions grew more intense. Han Feng began to notice the noise was different, and Ziyi commented that it sounded like the wall was cracking. They then started piling furniture against the wall to try to reinforce it, but Han Feng warned that it would be useless and urged them to act quickly, since he had a plan. The girl replied that they should leave it to her, as she could move everything quickly. She then activated her gluttonous black hole and sucked in all the furniture, shocking Ziyi with the power of that ability. Right after, Han Feng activated his purple energy, determined to reshape the wall as he had done before. But he knew he needed to control the scope, as the hardening process would take too long if it spread too wide. By combining the power of the purple light with the green light, he managed to repair the wall again. Ziyi, impressed, asked if he had magical powers. But before they could talk, another explosion hit and cracked the wall once more. Han Feng didn't understand how that was possible until the girl noticed they were bombing the floor. Realizing that repairing things was pointless, since everything was being destroyed from another angle, Han Feng said he had a very dangerous idea and asked if the others trusted him. They all replied that they would do whatever he said. Soon after, the invaders finally managed to blow the apartment door open. Taiwan ordered everyone to enter carefully and search every corner for supplies. As they entered, they realized the place was completely dark. The men commented that there was no one in the living room and no supplies either. In the kitchen, there was only some trash and a box of seeds. Frustrated, they began cursing Hui Na, calling her a liar. She insisted that she hadn't lied and suggested they might be hiding in another room. When they tried to open a door, Ziyi kicked it hard against one of the men, starting the confrontation. Han Feng began shooting, but realized the invaders were equipped with military shields. Even so, he ordered the others to escape. Shueyu, on the other hand, accused Han Feng of hoarding supplies selfishly, ignoring the collective, which had caused many people to starve. He said they were there to bring justice. Han Feng understood that Shuei was trying to manipulate everyone with moral blackmail, but he realized arguing was pointless. Those men were blinded, like a pack of wolves with red eyes, ready to attack. He then questioned what he was even doing there, since his home didn't have any supplies at that moment. The invaders firmly claimed that he was hiding everything. Hui Na reinforced this, saying that last time Han Feng's room had heating and light. Overcome with rage, Han Feng fired in Hui Na's direction, calling her a miserable liar. He said that if she hadn't tricked him into trading his supplies, he wouldn't be in that situation. Taiwan was completely outraged at Hui Na, accusing her of lying all along. Amid the confusion, Shueya said there was a simple solution. They should check Han Feng's room first. He asked if Han Feng would refuse to allow it, but the inspection was authorized. After the inspection, one of the men reported that there was absolutely nothing in the room, only scattered trash and a frightened little girl. The girl ran toward Han Feng, trembling with fear and saying she was very hungry. That scene made everyone realize they had been deceived. Shueya then demanded an immediate explanation from Hui Na. She insisted she hadn't lied, since she had seen everything with her own eyes. Confused, she began questioning how Han Feng had managed to hide everything so well. Overcome with suspicion, Hui Na grabbed the flashlight and pointed it directly at Han Feng's eyes. When he tried to shield himself from the light, she took advantage of the distraction and, with agility, managed to snatch the gun from his hands. Despite the distance between them, she was quick enough to disarm him, something that seemed unbelievable given his passivity. With the gun in her hands, Hui Na demanded that he tell the truth. Han Feng replied that the truth was simple. She had tricked everyone in search of supplies. When she threatened to shoot him, others intervened to prevent the worst from happening. The gun was taken from her by Xue. In the middle of the tension, Taiwan grabbed a piece of iron and, consumed by anger, said he was going to kill her. However, Shueyu stopped him, stating that the committee was not an execution ground nor a place for violence. He apologized to Han Feng, returned his weapon, and invited him to join the committee. He said there was no need to answer immediately, only to think it over and give his response the next day, when they went out to gather more supplies. After that, everyone left. The scene then shifted. Han Feng and Ziyi had once again modified their apartment. Ziyi was surprised to realize that the girl who had helped them had a house located directly above theirs. Han Feng's place looked even larger than hers, and it was thanks to this structure that they had managed to deceive everyone so effectively. Han Feng explained that the first stage of the plan was to make the apartment look abandoned, leaving some trash and empty packaging scattered on the floor. He asked Ziyi to open the window to quickly cool down the room. It was essential that the place seemed like it had been without food for a long time, reinforcing the impression of scarcity. Han Feng remarked that since Shueya had made such a big fuss, if he returned empty-handed, that could stir indignation among the residents. In such situations, people tend to point fingers at the weakest. Since Han Feng still had a gun, Hui Na might end up being used as a scapegoat. Concerned, Ziyi asked if Han Feng would really be safe even with the gun, considering they had managed to disarm him before. Han Feng admitted that was the worst possible scenario, but if Shueyu had the gun, he would try to resolve things peacefully. Ziyi then asked what would happen if Shueyu decided to shoot. Han Feng revealed that the gun originally had only one bullet and he had already used it. Surprised, Ziyi commented that it was impressive that his plan had allowed the weapon to be taken on purpose. Han Feng replied that this was part of the plan, at least partially. He went on to explain that the plan now was to pretend they were facing a very difficult situation, while gradually amassing a fortune in secret. The ultimate goal was to bring down the committee. The scene then shifted to the moment of supply distribution. Han Feng and Ziyi watched everything closely. Ziyi said that, according to his investigation, the first 4 floors had been completely emptied. The 5th and 6th 6 floors were used for logistics and housed some families. However, he hadn't been able to access the 7th and 8th floors, which made him suspect that the main warehouse was located there. He also mentioned that there were guards above the 5th floor. Z decided to go up first to distract the guards, while Han Feng would seize the opportunity to knock them out with a wooden stick. However, when they went up, they noticed the place was completely empty. Han Feng suspected that perhaps the guards had gone to eat, but Z warned him not to lower his guard at that moment. Upon reaching the 7th floor, Han Feng and Z realized that there was no one around. The absence of guards was already surprising, but the place was completely deserted, without a single soul. Faced with this, they decided to split up and agreed that if anyone found something, they would just shout. Han Feng reflected that there were many people in the committee, so it made no sense to confront them head-on. In his view, the only way to defeat them was from the inside out. He believed the committee was an organization sustained solely by the concentration of supplies. If they could find the warehouse and let the evil king empty it, the committee would collapse in no time. Although this seemed easy in theory, the real challenge was discovering where the supplies were hidden. At that moment, Ziyi came running and called out to Han Feng, who could hardly believe they had actually found the place. When he arrived, he saw a door with the words supplies written on it. Even so, Han Feng remained suspicious, wondering if it could be a trap. The key had been placed very carefully in the lock, which only increased his doubts. Ziyi suggested that perhaps the people in charge had simply forgotten it there, and said they would only know the truth if they tried. However, Han Feng noticed a very thin wire wrapped around the key's handle, which clearly indicated a mechanism prepared to trigger something. He remembered 2 residents mentioning the need to check the warehouse door, and now it all made sense. They had been talking about this trap. Because of that, Han Feng told them not to touch anything for now. Since the warehouse had already been located, they could investigate calmly and later figure out a safe way to open it. However, before they could leave, 2 men suddenly opened the door. Han Feng and Zi tried to flee immediately, but they were chased down and forced into a fight. During the struggle, they managed to kick one of the men and lock the door with an iron bar. But soon they heard footsteps coming from the stairs, indicating that more people were on their way up. Their only option at that point was to climb even higher. When they reached the 8th floor, Han Feng realized his arm was broken. During the fight, he had shielded Zi and gotten injured. At that moment, a mysterious man emerged from the shadows and pulled Han Feng into a room, locking the door behind them. The man stared at him intently and suspiciously asked what Han Feng was doing there. Han Feng tried to remain calm and said they were only looking for supplies. The man, however, didn't believe him and stomped hard on his broken arm, asking if he thought he was dealing with a 3-year-old child. He pointed out that Han Feng had carefully avoided the 5th and 6th floors, which showed he knew too much about the committee. Han Feng threw the question back at him, asking whether the man had been following them from the start. The man only replied that if he thought there were no guards around, he was gravely mistaken. Looking around, Han Feng saw several guards lying unconscious, which meant the stranger had already fought many of them alone. Meanwhile, other members of the committee were searching for Zi. The mysterious man then opened the window of the room, and Han Feng, shocked, asked what he intended to do since they were on the 8th floor. The man explained that, due to the massive amount of snow piled up on the lower levels, this was actually only the 4th floor in reality. He said he could use the snow to cushion the fall, and that it was nothing for him. With no other choice, the man jumped out of the window, and before vanishing, told Han Feng to jump as well if he wanted to stay alive. Even hesitating, Han Feng saw no other way. He activated his purple power at the moment of impact to reduce the force of the fall and managed to land safely. From above, the committee members could still see that they were alive. The mysterious man then elbowed the window of a nearby building, breaking it to enter. Han Feng followed him, and the scene shifted to the 2 of them gathered safely around a small fire. There, Han Feng reflected on how clever and efficient that bearded man was. If it weren't for him, he certainly would have been captured. As they warmed themselves by the fire, the mysterious man asked Han Feng if he was afraid, stating that the one left behind in the building was nothing more than a dead man. Still suspicious, Han Feng wanted to know why that man had saved his life. The man, however, replied coldly that he hadn't saved him. On the contrary, he would rather have killed him right there. But the fact that Han Feng hadn't fallen for the 7th floor trap proved he had some intelligence. For that reason, the man wanted him to reveal everything he knew about the committee. He added that Han Feng could choose to remain silent, but if he did, he would serve only as a meat shield. From the way he had knocked down the guards, the man deduced that Han Feng was either there to steal supplies or harbored some grudge against the committee. Faced with this, Han Feng directly asked whether that man had any quarrel with the group. The man didn't hesitate to answer yes. He said he hated the committee, especially because of Xue, who had hidden an important secret and caused the entire situation. Intrigued and unsettled, Han Feng wanted to know what secret that was, but the man only stood up and remarked that it seemed there was also a feud between Han Feng and Xue, which made everything more interesting. He then demanded once again that Han Feng reveal everything he knew about the committee, or else he would be killed right there. Pressed, Han Feng began to speak. He said that Xueyu had invaded his home, brought explosives, and on top of that, stolen his wife and his supplies. As revenge, he brought out all the hidden resources he had, but realized that one pistol wasn't enough to face so many people. In truth, he mixed lies with facts, thinking that the detail of carrying a broken gun would make his story more convincing. The man looked at him with disdain and said that a broken pistol was nothing against the committee. He pointed out that Han Feng hadn't even tried to use the gun, which proved how useless it was. When Han Feng asked why he hadn't accepted the gun as part of the plan, the man replied that it had all been just an act to maintain his leadership position among the others. Right after that, he wanted to know if Han Feng had brought allies to help him defeat Xueyu. Han Feng confirmed, saying that without Xueyu, the committee would become weaker. He admitted that, in the beginning, the committee had indeed helped some people survive, but over time, Xueyu's ideology had corrupted everyone. Now, they all believed that only those who were more ruthless and merciless deserved to live in comfort. And even if the apocalypse ended, those people would never be able to return to normal society. That was why Han Feng concluded that the committee had to be destroyed. But the man challenged him, asking what was the point of bringing the group down. To him, the world had become a game of survival of the fittest. Although he hated Xueyu, he thought Han Feng's ideas were just as foolish. According to him, if the committee were destroyed, the community would collapse into thefts and massacres. Trying to argue, Han Feng asked what would happen to that community if everyone simply left Xueyu alone. The man replied that perhaps they should consult a third opinion. And, saying this, he opened the door of a nearby room. Behind the door, someone had been hiding. The person tried to attack him immediately, but he dodged with agility. When he was about to retaliate with a punch, the opponent blocked the strike with both hands. At that moment, Han Feng stepped in, asking them to stop. He recognized the girl and explained that she was Nurse Kim. She was surprised to see him there. The scene shifted to a calmer setting. Kim tended to Han Feng's injured arm, carefully applying bandages. While treating him, she explained that she had taken some supplies from her grandfather to perform a checkup, but upon arriving, she discovered he had already passed away. Then she heard noises coming from the door, as if someone were trying to enter. Frightened, she decided to hide in the room, where she had remained until that moment. The man looked at Kim and coldly said that she was responsible for her grandfather's death. She admitted he was right, but made it clear she didn't regret it. Even if her actions seemed cruel or heartless, she believed she could only help others if she herself managed to survive. Curious, Han Feng asked if Xueya had allowed her to come and go freely in that place. Kim confirmed. She said he had given her a free pass and also provided many supplies. Faced with that, she couldn't simply refuse. She further explained that, in recent days, Xueya had been expelling the elderly and sick from the community, and her grandfather had been one of those affected. By the time she heard the news, it was too late, he was already gone. The man remarked that with fewer mouths to feed, the committee could last a little longer. But Han Feng said that, according to Ziyi, a new force had risen in the community, made up of people opposed to the committee. He believed that Xueya was eager to eliminate this new threat, and that was why he had begun abandoning the weak and elderly, prioritizing supplies for the stronger youths. With the way they were using bombs, it was clear they were preparing for a war against this new group. If that was true, Han Feng concluded he needed to find the weapons before they were used. The man then asked him what he could possibly do even if he found them. Han Feng replied that, at the very least, he could discover something. The man, however, mocked the idea, saying he was free to go kill himself trying. He stated that, in this apocalypse, Xueyu's committee was nothing more than a small faction, and there would still be many other struggles for survival. In this world, only the last survivor would be the true winner. After saying this, the man walked away, leaving Han Feng and Kim alone. Concerned, Kim asked if she could help with something, but Han Feng replied that he didn't need anything. He didn't want to drag her into that kind of situation. Even so, Kim insisted, asking him not to say such things. Just hearing that Xueyu had stolen Han Feng's supplies and even his wife filled her with rage. Realizing there was no way to convince her to step back, he admitted there was, in fact, something he could ask of her. Meanwhile, in another part of the community, some men were arguing about whether the young man they had seen was really Han Feng. One of them confirmed it without a doubt. Shortly after, Han Feng appeared before everyone and was quickly captured and tied to the ground. Furious, Taiwan began kicking him, questioning how he dared to act that way after Mr. Xue had spared his life. He accused him of trying to steal the community's supplies. One of the men interrupted, saying that Xueyu wanted everyone to gather upstairs. The two aggressors left, leaving Han Feng alone. Using his green light, he managed to speed up his regeneration. He felt his body heal, though the process was so draining it almost made him faint. Then, with the purple light, he broke the ropes and freed himself. The fracture was healed, but the amount of energy spent was so great that he could barely stand. Before he could rest, he heard footsteps approaching. Men appeared, and Han Feng quickly put his disguise back on. Watching the group, he recognized someone among the prisoners. It was Ziyi himself. Disguised, Han Feng walked over and slapped his friend across the face to wake him up. Still dazed, Ziyi thanked him for waking him but asked that next time he slap the other cheek, since the left one was completely numb. Han Feng then asked what had happened since they were separated. Ziyi explained that after being dragged into a room, the door in the hallway began to be forced open. He managed to remove the electric lock and hid. Inside the room, there was a hole in the floor that seemed to lead to a lower level. Thinking the guards would eventually discover the entrance, he climbed down the wires, believing he would reach the underground parking lot. Instead, he ended up on the second basement level. There was no one there, only tons of sealed boxes stacked up. Opening one of them, he found a large quantity of sausages so thick they were the size of his forearm. But as he reached out to grab one and examine it, he heard a noise behind him and was knocked out. He only woke up now, when Han Feng helped him. And then he realized why the committee acted so arrogantly. They had an absurd amount of food stored away. Still, Han Feng couldn't understand. If they already had so much food, why did they keep invading houses and stealing from others? Still shocked by what he had seen, Ziyi remarked that he had never in his life seen sausages that big. Han Feng, however, felt a bad premonition building in his chest. He began to wonder if that place was actually a secret warehouse maintained by Shueyu. At that moment, the two of them heard voices approaching. Two men were talking, and one line immediately caught their attention. Shueyu had ordered Ziyi's execution. The shock was immediate. Han Feng and Ziyi looked at each other, terrified at the thought of being marked for death. With no time to lose, they hid behind the door. When the two men entered, Han Feng and Ziyi quickly overpowered them, tying them up and immobilizing them. After that, Han Feng stated with certainty that Shueyu indeed had murderous intentions. Concerned, Ziyi asked what they should do about the supplies, since there were dozens of boxes piled up there. But Han Feng assured him that he had a plan, and that, for now, their priority was to meet with Xie Wang. Han Feng immediately called Xie Wang, asking if a woman had come to fetch her. Xie Wang confirmed that yes, but said it was the same woman who had stolen her weapon, and asked if he was really okay with that, since she had tried to kill him before. Han Feng's heart raced. He realized Hui Na had moved ahead of them and rushed to warn her. He told her not to open the door under any circumstances, because Hui Na was not the one he had sent. Worried, Han Feng and Ziyi decided to hurry back home immediately. But on the way, they heard many noises and screams spreading through the building. Taiwan was coordinating the movement of the people, ordering the elderly, women, and children to go up the stairs on the left, while the others should grab weapons and head down to the basement. The goal was to repel any invasion, protect the supplies, and ensure the survival of their loved ones. Han Feng and Ziyi disguised themselves and blended into the crowd. As they tried to pass unnoticed, they saw Zhang Hu's group engaged in a direct battle against the committee's defenders. At the same time, Hui Na was observing Han Feng's house, trying to figure out if he still lived there. It was far too quiet. That silence made her uneasy. That's when Nurse Kim suddenly appeared, asking what Hui Na was doing there. Hui Na replied that she was only looking for a little food. Kim, however, suspicious, asked why Hui Na was with so many people. The mistrust was mutual. Hui Na questioned what Kim was doing there, and Kim explained that she had come to treat someone. This made Hui Na wonder if Han Feng might be sick, which left her even more unsettled. At that moment, some of the men with Hui Na tried to take the supplies that belonged to Nurse Kim. She reacted coldly, asking what they thought they were doing, reminding them that Shueyu had ordered that she was not to be disturbed. Even so, the men surrounded her and tried to restrain her. What they didn't know was that Kim was extremely strong. With ease, she grabbed each of them as if they were dolls, tossing them aside and declaring that she didn't care what they were doing there. She only demanded that they not get in her way. With a determined look, Hui Na pulled out a knife and stabbed her in the back, calling her a monster, and warning the others that she was far stronger than she appeared, so they should be careful. But before they could do anything else, all the men at Hui Na's side drew their knives against Kim. However, the blades were instantly sucked into a black hole that appeared out of nowhere. Chi Chu's power. The black hole created by Chi Chu was so intense that it began pulling everything around it, including the attackers themselves. The air grew heavy, and chaos overtook the place. No one had expected that girl to wield such destructive power. Meanwhile, Youngjae's group was beating all the committee members, creating widespread chaos. Han Feng and Ziyi tried to escape, but they were almost caught by Youngjae. Even as he ran, Han Feng thought to himself that he had only punched the guy in the face once, and it made no sense to be chased for so long because of that. He remembered how the purple light had been useful in past situations, and wondered if it could help him again. However, before he could do anything, the two of them ended up surrounded. Forced to act quickly, Han Feng ordered Ziyi to fetch the evil queen as fast as possible, and set a meeting point point for them to regroup later. Though worried about leaving him alone, Z went on his way while Han Feng prepared to distract the enemies. Climbing onto a car, Han Feng drew everyone's attention by shouting that he had been one of the ones responsible for raising food prices, with the goal of starving them to death. Then, he flipped the crowd off, which provoked a wave of general outrage. Everyone rushed toward him. Han Feng then ran toward the parking lot entrance, thinking the metal gate could be used to block their way. However, he realized the gate was already damaged because of the accumulated snow. One of the men managed to punch Han Feng, but even so, he was able to touch the gate with his purple light. The people around wondered what that strange glow was, but suddenly the light vanished. Taking advantage of the confusion, Han Feng taunted the enemies again, daring them to come forward. However, the metal gate couldn't withstand the pressure and broke apart. This triggered a massive avalanche that poured into the parking lot, burying everything in snow. When he finally emerged from the snow, Han Feng realized he wasn't even tired, even after using the purple light. This made him think he was beginning to get used to that power. Then, a mysterious old man appeared right in front of him, startling him. Han Feng had the feeling that the man had been watching him for a long time. Without a word, the old man grabbed him by the neck and carried him to a safe place. There, still confused, Han Feng asked who he was. The stranger introduced himself as Li Zhenggao, which immediately made Han Feng recall the man who was opposing Xueyu. The old man confirmed it was indeed him. Then, he extended his hand to Han Feng, who didn't immediately understand what it meant. Li Zhenggao explained that he was proposing an alliance, as he had changed his mind. Suspicious, Han Feng remarked that if he was switching sides so suddenly, it might just be a trick, but Li Zhenggao explained it was simply a way for both of them to get what they wanted. He asked for a straight answer, yes or no. Han Feng thought that if he had this man by his side, his chances of victory would increase greatly. Although he still didn't trust him, he knew their goals aligned. With that, the two of them agreed to the partnership. The scene then shifts to the lower levels of the complex, where Taiwan announced that the convoy was ready and that they could move up to rescue the people. He explained that the first level gate had been opened by the snow, the temperature was dropping quickly, and the crowd was already dispersing. He also mentioned 2 men, but Xueyu assured him that it would not affect their plan. Meanwhile, Han Feng questioned why there were military vehicles inside the complex and when they had arrived. Li Zhenggao replied that those people were outsiders and that he had learned Xueyu intended to transfer the residents. Han Feng was puzzled. Since there was nowhere to take them, everything outside was buried under ice. Without wasting time, Li Zhenggao ran off, saying he would leave Xueyu in Han Feng's hands. Li Zhenggao began making noise as he stormed the place, drawing everyone's attention, who quickly suspected the presence of an intruder. Without hesitation, he launched into battle and knocked down all the enemies around him. Meanwhile, Han Feng took advantage of the distraction to get close to Xueyu and swiftly pointed a gun at his head. However, Xueyu showed no surprise, as if he had already anticipated this. Confused by his enemy's composure, Han Feng asked how he knew he would show up there. Xueyu explained that before the disaster brought by the cold, he had stockpiled a huge amount of supplies. At first, he thought Han Feng was just one of his contacts, but later realized he was mistaken. He then suggested Han Feng take a closer look at his own weapon. At that moment, Han Feng discovered a hidden bug inside the pistol. Xueyu revealed that if not for that, he would never have returned the weapon in the first place. He said he knew exactly what Han Feng had been doing and had been tracking his movements. Even so, he made it clear that he had no intention of harming him, as he saw him as an intelligent man and hoped he would join the group. According to Xueyu, as long as they continued sending people for experiments, they would be able to survive. But Han Feng immediately refused, declaring that he would not be anyone's test subject. Faced with this, Xueyu regretted his decision, and Special Forces soldiers appeared and began firing. Han Feng ran for cover but was pulled to safety by Li Zhenggao, who had returned to help him. Even as he was rescued, Han Feng urgently asked what they were doing and why they hadn't fled yet. Li Zhenggao calmly replied that it was only 3 Special Forces soldiers, and that he himself would distract them so Han Feng could escape. He then charged at the soldiers and easily defeated them, making it clear he was no ordinary person. Meanwhile, Xueyu remarked that it was already too late, since they needed to drive off to collect more people. But Han Feng, determined, used his purple light ability to completely soften the ground and block their passage. One of the soldiers threw a grenade directly at him, hitting him squarely. The blast knocked Han Feng unconscious, and he woke up in a nightmarish world inhabited by goats. There, a grotesque giant goat appeared and grabbed him by the tongue. Han Feng's body began to slowly melt, exposing his skeleton, and his eyes glowed with an intense green light. When he returned to consciousness, he was enveloped in a red aura, and with a single hand, destroyed a high-powered vehicle that Taiwan and the others were trying to use to escape. Shocked, Taiwan pointed a gun at Han Feng, demanding to know what was happening. But Han Feng, still wrapped in his red aura, destroyed both the weapon and Taiwan's clothing, leaving him nearly freezing in the extreme cold. Seeing his brother in danger, Taiwu rushed forward to try to protect him, but Han Feng easily broke the iron bar he was holding. Ignoring the two brothers, Han Feng walked over to one of the military jeeps. Using his purple ability, he made the vehicle collapse, as if it were a deflating balloon. One of the soldiers tried to shoot him in the face, but the bullet only grazed his skin, and the wound regenerated within seconds. Realizing they were out of ammunition, the soldiers fled in despair. Meanwhile, Li Zhenggao watched everything from a distance, wondering what exactly Xueyu was planning. Han Feng, on the other hand, was destroying everything and everyone in his path with overwhelming strength. However, he spent so much energy that he eventually fainted. Taking advantage of the moment, Taiwan approached with the intention of killing the now unconscious Han Feng. But before he could do anything, Li Zhenggao appeared and landed a powerful punch on his face. He then grabbed Han Feng and, with concern, wondered if he had completely lost control of his powers. At that moment, Xueyu appeared with a weapon in his hands, accompanied by several others. As soon as they arrived at the scene, they realized all the soldiers were dead. Taiwu had frozen to death. Faced with the situation, Xueyu concluded that the plan had failed. Besides the losses, they also didn't know where the main camp was located. So, he ordered everyone to return home. Meanwhile, Han Feng suddenly woke up, frightened, shouting that a grenade was coming. But he quickly realized he was still alive, and began to wonder where exactly he was. Relieved, Li Zhenggao remarked that he had finally returned to normal. But Han Feng didn't understand what he meant by that. Confused, he asked if they were still on the second basement level. But Li Zhenggao answered ironically, saying that he didn't even know himself well enough, so how could he be sure? Even so, he mentioned that he had some ideas about Xueya's plan, and that they could get more information from the man they had tied up. Li Zhenggao explained that the man claimed to have been sent by a base to negotiate with Xiu, and that he wanted to find out exactly what they were negotiating. Pressured, the soldier revealed that they were exchanging residents for weapons and food. Shocked, Han Feng asked what exactly people were being traded for, and the soldier replied it was to help build a new base. In disbelief, Han Feng thought that was absurd, but the soldier insisted they were only trying to rebuild civilization and save humanity, claiming there was nothing wrong with their actions. Even so, Li Zhenggao broke the man's finger and asked what would happen if he failed his mission, questioning whether people with special abilities would be sent after them. The soldier, not fully understanding the question, said he didn't know what that meant. Analyzing the man's behavior, Han Feng began to believe that the base really did have advanced users and that it was probably a dangerous enemy. Still, he scolded Li Zhenggao for his brutality, saying there was no need to kill the soldier at that moment. But Li Zhenggao, impatient, said Han Feng was being naive to believe in that story about saving people, explaining that the base was no different from any other faction in that collapsing world. To him, they either destroyed that organization or fled to find shelter. Still weighing the situation, Han Feng decided to return and discuss everything with the others. As he walked away, he thought Li Zhenggao was truly insane and wondered what kind of person he could be. But if what the soldier had said was true, then perhaps finding a base outside was the safest option. He remembered seeing some military jeeps and a large excavator but couldn't recall in which sector they were located. Suddenly, someone appeared behind him to attack, but Han Feng managed to defend himself with his powers. Just as he was about to strike back, he realized it was only the nurse, Ziyi. After the scare, the two began exchanging information about everything that had happened. Ziyi revealed that the bastard Shui was using the neighbors as bargaining chips for supplies. Still trying to make sense of the situation, Ziyi asked if sending people to an organization that could ensure their survival wouldn't actually be a good thing. But Han Feng explained that it was only the word of a soldier and that, if the base were truly reliable, Shueya and the others would already have gone there. There were too many hidden things in that story, and even if they couldn't completely dismiss the enemy's words, they also couldn't trust them blindly. Ziyi asked what they would do if someone from the base really showed up, but Han Feng replied that it was something to think about later. Without transportation, they couldn't even leave the place. So, they started searching the military jeeps for useful tools. After some time, Han Feng found several weapons and told them to call the girl with the black hole as quickly as possible. However, they were puzzled to notice that the two girls were acting strangely. When they approached, they found a huge piece of cloth covering something. Kim, suspicious, said she had heard a sound coming from behind it. Han Feng asked the girl if she had a strong flashlight, and she said yes. With the place illuminated, Han Feng and Ziyi pulled the cloth away and revealed a huge underground cavern. Han Feng, surprised, thought that for someone to secretly dig such a massive tunnel, those people were certainly not ordinary. The soldiers' words probably represented only the surface of what was really going on, and the community they lived in was far from safe. Observing the structure, Han Feng concluded that it seemed to be part of the community's drainage system. As the girl approached the entrance, Han Feng held her back, telling her not to go go in because it was dangerous. He said they needed to return first. The scene then shifted to the moment when they were preparing to explore the tunnel. After gathering some items, Han Feng asked them to add more weapons, some food seeds, and a piece of raw pork for him. He stressed that, although they would explore the place, if an emergency arose, they should return immediately. During the preparations, he noticed that the girl had become much more skilled at using her special ability. Now she could access the dimensional space with ease and retrieve exactly what she wanted. Because of this, Han Feng asked her to wait for him in a hidden room, whose entrance he had reinforced with walls and doors. Even if someone found her, it wouldn't be easy to get inside. Soon after, Han Feng and Zi headed toward the tunnel. The girl, staying behind, murmured to herself that the true eye of the evil king would protect its apostle, though no one really understood what she meant. Meanwhile, Han Feng reflected on the situation. The threat they faced was not only Shuyu but also something connected to that mysterious tunnel. Since the community was no longer safe, perhaps they could find a new survival point through it. In any case, they needed to investigate. Inside the tunnel, Zi remarked that she thought the place would be warmer, but it was just as cold as outside. Han Feng noticed that everything there was frozen, and was impressed that someone could have built it so quickly. They walked for about an hour, passing through several underground corridors and sections. Zi began complaining that they were walking in circles and had already lost her sense of direction. Observing the layout of the pipes around them, Han Feng said that one of the directions seemed to lead to a residential area, while the other was still unknown. Shortly after, they found a sewage distribution map and realized they were near other communities, with a stadium further ahead. Suddenly, Han Feng asked Zi to turn off the headlamp. Moments later, some vehicles passed nearby. Zi commented that they seemed to be heading toward the Hancheng community. Han Feng noticed they were army trucks and concluded they were probably connected to the 3 soldiers who had shown up earlier. Zi suggested that maybe they were there to transport people and build a base. Han Feng thought it might be a good idea to follow them to try to discover something. However, Zi suggested another route. She recalled that there was a door at the back of the tunnel and that, a year earlier, an old woman from the Hanshin community had fallen into the sewers, and it had been Han Feng who rescued her. Han Feng asked if she really remembered where the entrance was, and Zi assured him she did, saying she had an excellent memory and had been one of the top students in high school. But when they arrived at the location, the door was completely frozen. Still, Zi tried other points further ahead but failed in all attempts. Finally, she managed to open one of the sewer covers, which gave access to the underground parking lot of the Hansen community. Inside, they found several dead people, suggesting that a fight had taken place there. There were also people building a wall and soldiers guarding the area. One of the soldiers remarked that it was hell to have to guard that place, as they had been there since before the tunnel was finished. Han Feng concluded that the residents of the community were probably being controlled by the soldiers. But before they could think of a plan, Zi warned that the ground was starting to tremble slightly. Suddenly, one of the soldiers ordered everyone to step back, as the tunnel was about to collapse. At that instant, it gave way, and from the ruins of the broken structure emerged a huge man with green eyes. Seeing the figure, Zi wondered whether he was really human or some kind of ghost. Han Feng, however, realized that it was no coincidence for such a massive tunnel to exist without anyone in the community knowing. It was extremely dangerous. If they were discovered, they would undoubtedly be killed. The giant man looked around and asked where his snack was. One of the soldiers replied that the tunnel hadn't even been cleared yet, so there couldn't possibly be any snacks there. Irritated, the man began pounding the ground, demanding food. The dust was so thick that Zi ended up sneezing, which gave them away. As soon as they were discovered, the two bolted through the tunnel. The giant started chasing them, and with just one slap on the ground, he completely destroyed the floor beneath their feet. Seeing the chance to use his ability, Han Feng activated the purple light, making the ground around them soft. The giant man then recognized that he was an advanced user. Taking advantage of the situation, Han Feng combined the purple light with the green one, trapping the giant in the deformed ground. But he soon realized the man was starting to break free. Before that could happen, Ziyi appeared with an iron bar and struck the giant. However, this only made him even angrier. He shouted that now, for sure, the two of them would die. Once again, they ran as fast as they could. Moments later, the ceiling collapsed, blocking the path they had just taken, which gave them a bit of relief. But Han Feng knew they had to get out of there as soon as possible. To do that, it was essential to find a landmark and understand their location. Ziyi, confident, said that his sense of direction was excellent and that he had memorized the underground distribution map. After 40 minutes of walking, it became clear that they were completely lost. However, Han Feng felt a draft of wind coming from a specific direction and noticed it was blowing from above. They walked a little further and saw a faint light ahead. Perhaps that was the exit. They climbed climbed a slippery wall, and as they emerged, they realized they were outside. Han Feng recognized a tall building and remarked that it looked like the Ding Feng building, the tallest in the area, located 5 kilometers north of their community. This meant they had come out in the completely opposite direction. Han Feng explained that the Xingfu community was located on the 3rd ring road south of Hanchuan City, and at that moment, they were almost at the 4th ring road to the north. The only way to return was by land, which required crossing the Jingshan district, a high-altitude area. It was unlikely they would be able to return that day. Ziyi, however, tried to reassure his companion. He said that once they reached Jingshan, he could use his connections, since he knew the area well and had experience with snowy roads. But as he said this, he ended up sinking into the deep snow, showing that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Han Feng then said they needed to slow down and look for shelter. The snowfall was getting heavier and heavier, and it was necessary to find a place to spend the night urgently. They kept walking until Ziyi mentioned that they were only 3 kilometers from Jingshan and could reach it in about an hour. Even so, Han Feng warned that the snowstorm was getting worse and that they needed to pick up the pace. Along the way, they came across frozen corpses of people who had been overconfident and set out without enough supplies. Caught by a sudden storm, they couldn't find shelter and froze to death. Shaken by the scene, Ziyi suggested they stop and rest for the night. Otherwise, they risked suffering the same fate. Han Feng agreed. Thus, they continued until they arrived at a small village called Jingshan, one of the few that hadn't yet been completely swallowed by the heavy snow. As they walked through the village of Jingshan, Han Feng observed the landscape and wondered how the people still inside the community were doing. But before he could think further, they noticed someone approaching. Han Feng asked if that person was one of the connections Ziyi had mentioned earlier. Ziyi then told him to wait a moment, as he would ask. However, Han Feng immediately sensed that something was wrong. His suspicion was confirmed. 2 armed men suddenly appeared and held Ziyi at gunpoint, ordering him not to move. One of them declared that this was a robbery. When Han Feng tried to reach for his weapon, the second man pointed his gun at him and demanded he stay still, ordering him to hand over everything he had. Han Feng considered the possibility of reacting by using his healing ability. Perhaps he could survive a gunshot, but Ziyi probably wouldn't be so lucky. For that reason, he decided not to take the risk. The two were handcuffed and taken away by the robbers. As they were forced to walk along a snow-covered trail, Han Feng asked why they were being taken, since the men had already taken all of their supplies. One of the robbers replied that there was a reason for it, but didn't explain further. During the walk, Han Feng noticed that the place offered a privileged view of the entire urban area of Hanchuan City. That could be useful. Soon, they arrived at a residence. One of the men used a remote control on the main gate and, to Han Feng's surprise, it actually opened. Even with no power in the whole city, that gate was still functioning, which indicated the presence of a generator. That impressed Han Feng. He observed the place more carefully. They were houses that seemed to have been built recently. Han Feng wondered how just 2 people had managed to do all of that. He thought that if they could defeat the 2 robbers and combine his abilities with those of the dimensional space girl, they could turn that place into a secure fortress. But he was quickly interrupted. One of the robbers noticed that he was smiling and ordered them to hurry up and start digging the snow around. He said that once they were finished, not only would they be allowed to leave, but they would also have their supplies returned. Han Feng, suspicious, asked if that was true. The man replied yes, but warned that they'd better not try anything. Then he ordered his partner, Chaozi, to guard the 2. Annoyed, Chaozi complained that the other only knew how to give orders, but still threatened them. He said that if they didn't start digging immediately, he would blow their heads off. Han Feng replied that they were still tied up, but the man shouted that he didn't want to hear excuses. With no alternative, Han Feng and Ziyi began digging the snow around the marked area. While working, Ziyi asked if they really would be released afterward. Han Feng admitted he wasn't sure. Looking to the side, he saw several bodies buried in the snow, which meant many people had already died there. That frightened Ziyi, but Han Feng told him to stay quiet, since any reaction would draw the criminals' attention. He also said they couldn't just wait for death, they had to act. That was when Han Feng shared a plan. They began pretending to fight, shouting and shoving each other to convince the guards that they were in conflict. One of the robbers angrily asked what was going on, but the 2 continued their argument without stopping. He said they could argue all they wanted as long as they finished the job before sunset. Otherwise, he promised to shoot them. As time went by, Han Feng and Ziyi's act worked. They managed to sneak into the criminal's house. Once inside, they surprised the 2 men and handcuffed them, turning the situation around and regaining control. Han Feng remarked that, apparently, the 2 men were there because of debt collection. Ziyi, suspicious, asked if the bodies outside had been killed by them. The 2 men immediately denied it, saying they had nothing to do with it. Then Han Feng, coldly, said that if they weren't responsible for the deaths, they could leave but not without punishment. He ordered them to strip off their clothes and walk away naked, out into the snow. Ziyi, shocked by the decision, commented that Han Feng was the devil himself, but Han Feng ignored the remark and said they needed to return immediately. He explained that his original intention was only to check the tunnel and leave quickly, but the setbacks had delayed everything. Now, he didn't even know what the situation in the community was like. He only hoped that everyone was still safe. Elsewhere in the city, Kim was showing concern over their delay, suspecting that something might have happened. But the girl with her said she didn't need to worry about Han Feng, because he was the chosen one of the true eye of the evil king, and therefore wouldn't die so easily. Zheng Gao, on the other hand, said that instead of worrying about others, they should focus on their own situation. He revealed that after Han Feng entered that tunnel, an army had emerged from it. Among them was an extremely powerful person with the ability to control the earth. Xue apparently had good relations with this army, and now all the residents of the community obeyed his orders. According to Zheng Gao, they had become public enemies of the community. Xue was mobilizing several people to hunt them down. He said the residents were foolish to believe they would be saved by the soldiers, when in reality they were being led to their own destruction without even realizing it. The girl stated that, to her, it didn't matter whether that was true or false. Even with doubts, there was nothing they could do. Choosing obedience was, at that moment, the only real chance of survival. She concluded that humans had always been this way. Shortly after, she ended up falling asleep. Kim covered her with an improvised cloth, commenting that if she didn't cover herself, she would catch a cold. Zheng Gao, observing the scene, thought it was a problem being surrounded by such fragile people. But he reflected on the girl's words, choosing obedience. That thought led him to remember his past. In a flashback, he was fighting a man in intense physical training. His coach shouted at him, ordering him to dodge as he had been taught, saying he hadn't trained him to stand there and take hits. Zheng Gao lost that fight. And after the defeat, the coach humiliated him, asking if he wanted to go back to the miserable life he had before. Back in the present, Zheng Gao made a decision. He told the girls they needed to leave that place immediately. It was far too dangerous to remain there any longer. But at that very moment, the door to the house was kicked open. The giant man reappeared, saying he could smell living people. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, some soldiers were organizing reports. One of them reported that the number of personnel was complete, that there were 97 refugees, and that the emergency food stock was 126 crates. Another ordered everything to be loaded onto vehicles to take back to the base. He also informed Shui that the 3 members of the advance team, sent earlier, were still missing. Shui, trying to shirk responsibility, replied that it had nothing to do with him, since they had all been killed by a man named Han Feng. The officer doubted the story, saying it was impossible for a single person to eliminate 3 elite soldiers. But Shui insisted. He said Han Feng possessed superpowers and had created a purple light, capable of melting even metal. Trying to show loyalty, Shui said that he had always followed the army's orders, and had even prepared sausages using that mysterious material. The officer, irritated, ordered him to shut up and stop talking about it. But Shui insisted that he had no reason to lie. The man stated that Shui had supplied them with a great deal of emergency food. Because of that, whether he liked it or not, he had long been considered part of the group. He said he wouldn't kill his own people so easily, but would send men to find this Han Feng, hoping that Shui wasn't lying. Meanwhile, a burly man was threateningly asking who among them was Han Feng. Zheng Gao quickly told the girls to stay behind him, as he realized that man was no ordinary person. He thought that not only had this man easily destroyed the reinforced door made by Han Feng, but he also radiated a beast-like aura, something that clearly did not belong to an ordinary human. With his experience, he immediately understood that this man was extremely dangerous, and therefore they had to flee. In an attempt to escape, Zheng Gao tried to break the window glass, but nearly fractured his arm in the process. Shocked, he wondered why the glass was so strong. That was when one of the girls explained that the glass had also been reinforced by Han Feng. Faced with this, Zheng Gao decided to confront the man alone, so the girls would have a chance to escape. Meanwhile, Nurse Kim tried to mislead the intruder, saying there was no one named Han Feng there, and suggesting he had entered the wrong room. The man even apologized for the mistake, but upon realizing he was indeed in room 1804, he changed his mind and stormed in again, accusing everyone of lying. He said that if Han Feng didn't show up, they would all die. Faced with the situation, Zheng Gao quickly grabbed the 2 girls and threw them out the window in a desperate act to save them. The burly man standing in front of him angrily said that he hated dishonest people. Meanwhile, Han Han Feng and Ziyi were on skis, returning much faster than before. They quickly arrived at the Xingfu community. At the very moment the girls were falling from the building, the black hole girl used her ability to summon several blankets, which softened their fall. Even so, they almost landed right on top of Han Feng and Ziyi, who happened to be passing by at that instant. Surprised, Han Feng asked what had happened to them. Kim replied that a huge monster had suddenly invaded the room. The black hole girl warned that he was coming, and right after, the burly man fell from the sky beside them. Quickly, Kim grabbed the two and started running with them. The man, on the other hand, said that he was a good baby, and that the real monsters were them. Hungry, he looked at the four of them as if they were snacks. Han Feng, struck by an idea, decided to act. He said he had a way to deal with him. He took a handful of soybeans, activated his power, and threw them at the man. The big guy ate the soybeans immediately and said they were delicious. But soon he began to writhe in pain, as the soybeans turned into plants inside his mouth, causing intense agony. Han Feng apologized for the poor hospitality while the man spat blood, tearing the plants out of his mouth. That moment was enough for everyone to escape. Soon after, some soldiers arrived at the scene and began following their trail. The commander of the soldiers remarked that the weather was so freezing that they probably hadn't gone far. He then asked the injured man how he had gotten hurt like that. The man replied that it was because of the soybeans the other had thrown into his mouth. The commander found that curious and commented that such an ability could be useful to solve the problem of food shortages. He then ordered them to bring the prisoner they had captured upstairs. The scene then shifted back to Han Feng, who asked exactly what had happened there and where Zheng Gao was. Kim explained that after Han Feng left, a group of soldiers had appeared in the community. Shueya and the other residents ended up siding with them. The monster that had attacked them had been looking for Han Feng, and impressively, managed to break even the reinforced door he had built. Han Feng, surprised, asked how that was possible, since not even explosives had been able to open that door. At that moment, it was revealed that Zheng Gao had stayed behind to save the girls. Faced with this, Han Feng said that the dead cannot be brought back, and for that reason, his sacrifice could not be in vain. To honor him, everyone had to escape, but the girls refused that idea. They said they needed to go back to save Zheng Gao. Ziyi agreed with them, saying that loyalty was important and that they couldn't simply abandon him. Han Feng explained that it wasn't for lack of will that he hesitated, but because facing that kind of monster was so dangerous that surviving it had already been a miracle. On the other side, the soldiers were with Zheng Gao, and their captain began calling out for Han Feng using a loudspeaker. He said they had found an injured person who seemed to be his friend, and that they had already given him first aid. He also stated that he knew Han Feng was nearby, and that he had no intention of harming him. He said all of it had been just a misunderstanding. Upon hearing this, Qin showed she was willing to rescue her friend, but was held back by Han Feng and Ziyi. The black hole girl, however, confirmed that the injured man was indeed Zheng Gao. The captain continued, saying that his organization needed talents like Han Feng. He guaranteed that if Han Feng accepted to join the group, his wife, children, and brothers would receive high-level treatment. This caused surprise, and everyone asked if he really had a wife and children. Han Feng, coldly, replied that of course he did not. Meanwhile, the captain was talking to Zheng Gao, saying it seemed like his brother was not going to show up. Zheng Gao, looking tired, admitted that it really seemed like he would not return, since they had only known each other for a few days. Outraged by this answer, the captain punched Zheng Gao and scolded him for risking his life for someone he barely knew. He said it had all been a waste. The captain then turned back to Han Feng, saying there was no reason for him to sacrifice himself for strangers. If he liked women, he could pick any from the base. At that moment, Han Feng seemed ready to act, but Ziyi and Kim held him back. The black hole girl, suspicious, said none of those soldiers could be trusted, but mentioned there was a way to save the old man and asked whether they were willing to help her or not. Meanwhile, the captain kept beating Zheng Gao, saying the boy was far too cautious. Zheng Gao, even while injured, argued that it was impossible to support so many people with so few resources, and questioned why the captain wanted to bring even more people to his base. The captain replied that saving people was their duty, and selfish people would never understand that. But Zheng Gao started laughing and asked who that man thought he was fooling. Then the captain coldly said that since Zheng Gao was already dying, he might as well reveal the truth. He asked which animal was the most abundant in modern cities, so abundant that no one would ever dare eat it. The answer left Zheng Gao visibly shaken, because he understood what the captain meant. The captain concluded by saying that the living eat food, but the dead become the food. At that moment, everyone noticed something falling from the sky. It was a mix of cigarettes, alcohol, food, vegetables, and meat. The men ran excitedly to grab everything, but the captain fired a shot into the air and ordered them back into position. That was when Han Feng appeared, driving what looked like a gigantic tractor. He declared that the time to fight had come. The girl had planned to drop tempting bait to lure the enemies, like lambs being guided into a trap. Transformed into an iron giant, Han Feng began his attack. His goal was to save a lost soul and take it to a new home. Since no one understood what the girl was saying, he began translating everything for the others. Ziyi thought it was an excellent idea and praised her. She then asked if everyone was ready for the mission, but Han Feng questioned how he was supposed to find such a large vehicle. The girl replied that she had already summoned the Iron Giant before, and without hesitation, she called forth a massive excavator. Han Feng found it amusing to drive that enormous machine. As soon as he descended with the excavator, he started running over the enemies in his path. However, a very strong man tried to stop the excavator and shouted that no one could be stronger than him. Han Feng, impatient, asked if he was crazy for trying to compete with the strength of an excavator, then lifted him effortlessly, as if he were light as a feather. The captain, trying to regain control, threatened to kill Zheng Gao, but Han Feng completely ignored his words and drove the excavator straight at him. Using the purple power to cushion the impact, he managed to rescue Zheng Gao and told him to hold on tight, because he was going to speed up. Frightened, Zheng Gao asked where he was driving that huge thing. Han Feng then parked in front of the building where his friends were, ready to rescue them. As they fled, Han Feng realized the soldiers were following them and began shooting. One of the soldiers warned the captain that the snow was too thick and the vehicle tires were skidding so much they could not pick up speed. The captain, confused, wondered where they had gotten such a massive excavator. Just then, a pile of garbage started falling right on top of the soldiers' vehicles, completely wrecking them. The captain could not understand where so much trash was coming from. The girl then explained that this was the true power of the evil king's eye, but while speaking, she sneezed from the intense cold. Han Feng, disgusted, complained that her snot had dripped onto his head. Zheng Gao, still shaken, thanked everyone for saving his life. Han Feng mentioned that he and Ziyi had found a cozy village nearby and were planning to hide there. Everyone agreed with the idea. However, halfway through, the excavator broke down. Annoyed, Han Feng asked the black hole girl if she had any oil. She said yes, but then summoned several bottles of cooking oil instead, completely confusing the situation. Han Feng sighed, saying that was not what he meant. It seemed that at that moment, everyone was facing an unexpected problem. The black hole girl said that she had accidentally thrown away the refrigerator, the sofa, and even the power generator. That left everyone shocked. What bothered Han Feng the most was finding out that she had also discarded the fuel he had saved for an entire year. However, the girl replied that there was still a little natural gas left. Han Feng was outraged and said that if she managed to start a car with that, he would call her father. But, to everyone's surprise, she picked up a bucket and claimed that some of the things he had stored were still there. Even so, Han Feng looked at the contents and thought it was all just trash. However, he soon noticed a strange substance that looked like coal and a black liquid, probably the result of rotten meat, and got the idea of trying to use it as fuel. He asked her to bring a piece of meat and an iron bucket, thinking that although producing more meat was difficult, spoiling it was easy. As soon as he began heating the liquid, everyone complained about the horrible smell spreading around. But the experiment worked. The liquid really caught fire. With that, Han Feng concluded that they wouldn't need to walk long distances in the snow anymore, since they now had a new kind of fuel. Thanks to this discovery, they finally managed to get the vehicle running. Kim commented that she was starving, and the black hole girl promptly revealed several kinds of food stored in her space. This caught Zheng Gao's attention, and he asked how big that black hole was, since he had heard that an entire supermarket had been emptied overnight. He asked if that had been her doing, and she proudly confirmed it. Meanwhile, Han Feng warned that they were approaching the hillside village he had mentioned earlier. Everyone got excited, celebrating their arrival. However, right at that moment, the excavator's engine exploded, leaving Han Feng furious, as they were so close to their final destination. With no alternative, everyone had to continue on foot, walking through the snow. When they finally arrived, they were nearly frozen. To warm up, they lit a campfire. Zheng Gao observed the place and commented that the dwelling looked like a good shelter. Since the wind carried the snow downhill, it didn't accumulate on top, preventing the houses from being buried. Also, it was difficult for anyone climbing the hill to reach them, which made the place easy to defend. He then asked if the group planned to establish a long-term base there, but once again, everyone seemed to ignore poor Zheng Gao's comment. Han Feng, on the other hand, reflected that he hadn't expected the girl to lose the power generator. If the former residents hadn't left another fuel generator there, they would have been in serious trouble. Luckily, they managed to get the house's power running. When he returned, Han Feng asked if everyone was hungry, but the girl said she wanted to take a bath and asked him to explain how to heat the water. Kim, blushing, said that she also wanted to wash up, since she hadn't bathed since the snowstorm began. Han Feng, trying to keep his composure, decided to take care of it right away. Checking the bathroom, he noticed the pipes had burst, but since there was a bathtub, there was still a solution. They began cleaning the place, and with the heaters, they managed to melt the ice inside the tub, turning it into water. Han Feng remarked that the water was heating up too slowly, and the girl agreed. When the group's genius put his hand in the water to test it, he ended up getting electrocuted. But something unusual happened. His hand emitted a red light, and suddenly the water was completely hot. He was startled, not understanding what had just happened, and began to wonder if this could be the effect of his mysterious red light. Then the scene shifted, and someone excitedly commented that they could finally take a bath. The black hole girl teased Kim, asking if she wasn't getting a little too excited, seeing her so thrilled about the bath items. Kim replied that it had been a long time since she had seen a place with so many options, and asked which product she should use. There were bath salts, various shampoos, conditioners, liquid soaps, and even body oils. At that moment, Kim called the girl Chi-Chu and remarked that she really had very good taste. Finally, the two began bathing together. Kim found Chi-Chu very cute and small, but Chi-Chu snapped back, saying not to treat her like a child, since she was already 21. Kim was surprised by her age, and Chi-Chu joked, saying it was because of her evil eye, which made her look eternally young. Seeing Kim's shock, she laughed and explained that she was only joking. In reality, it was just because she had a baby face. Meanwhile, Han Feng was outside, watching the girls, and muttered to himself that the story about being 21 was absurd. Suddenly, Ziyi appeared and caught Han Feng, who immediately grew flustered and tried to play it off. With a mocking tone, Ziyi asked if he had been trying to peek at the girls. Han Feng quickly denied it, but Ziyi smirked and said he would show him how to properly spy on a woman. Desperate, Han Feng tried to hold him back and stop him from doing anything. Later, the two were already in the living room playing video games. Zheng Hao, upon seeing this, asked how they could be playing at a time like that. Han Feng explained that, now that they had food, drinks, and electricity, it was a reason to celebrate, and since they planned on staying there for a while, they also needed entertainment, otherwise, they would eventually go insane. It was then that Han Feng asked Zheng Gao if he intended to reunite with his subordinates. He said he knew Zheng Gao wasn't an ordinary person, and that he only wanted to live in peace. As long as he didn't drag anyone into trouble, he was welcome to stay as long as he wished. At that moment, Zheng Hao decided to reveal his true identity. He said that he was there as an investigator of ability users, but before he could finish saying what he thought about Han Feng cut him off, saying he didn't want to hear any of it. Zheng Gao, understanding the situation, agreed. He said that as soon as his arm healed, he would leave, but he assured Han Feng that he wouldn't tell anyone what he knew, so there was no need to worry. Shortly after, the girls showed up, saying they had finished bathing, and asking if the two of them weren't going to wash up as well. Ziyi joked that he would save water by bathing together with his brother. Han Feng, startled, replied that he didn't want to bathe with another man. Even so, he ended up being forced to share the bathroom with him. Later, everyone had a hearty meal, and at last, they were able to sleep peacefully after such a long time. The next day, Han Feng reinforced the walls, the roof, and the fences around the village. He also took the opportunity to convert the room on the top floor into a sauna, from which he could look out over the mountain while relaxing. That was when he spotted someone climbing up the hill. He rushed out to help and managed to save the man, bringing him inside. Then he asked Ziyi if he knew him. Ziyi replied that yes, he did, and that the man's name was Chang Do, the right-hand man of Chief Liu, the same man who had once helped Han Feng acquire a weapon. When he woke up, Chang Do recognized Han Feng as the boy who had bought a weapon, and he was surprised by the reunion. After calming down, he explained what had happened. A few days earlier, their office had been attacked by a group of soldiers. Many had been killed or injured, including Chief Liu himself. Ziyi immediately asked what had happened to the chief, and Chang Do explained that, thanks to Han Feng's advice, the chief had stockpiled a large number of supplies in advance, which allowed them to withstand the crisis and save hundreds of residents. However, a group of soldiers broke into the place, stole the supplies, and killed several innocents. To protect everyone, Chief Liu fought back, but he was shot in the leg and captured. The survivors had agreed to regroup in a village where the supplies had been stored. That was precisely the same village where Han Feng and the others were now. Worried, Ziyi asked if the chief was still alive. Chang Do replied that most likely he was, which brought a bit of hope. For Ziyi, that was great news, since, if not for Chief Liu, he might not even be alive himself. Han Feng then asked Chang Du to take him to Chief Liu, as he needed to rescue him as quickly as possible. However, Chang Du questioned whether he had lost his mind, since the place was full of armed men, and it didn't make sense for only two people to attempt such a dangerous rescue. Even so, Ziyi assured him that Han Feng didn't need to be afraid, because he would be right by his side. Chang Du, on the other hand, thought that if Han Feng wanted to kill himself, he should go ahead and do it alone. That was when Zheng Gao appeared, asking if they were talking about Chief Liu of the Juyi organization. He explained that back when he fought in underground boxing rings, it was Chief Liu who had bought him and given him back his freedom. Out of gratitude, if Han Feng was willing to rescue him, then he would help as well. He said he had many friends in the city and could call on them to support the mission. Chang Du recognized Zheng Gao and said that he was the legendary, frenzied wild dog of that ring. Han Feng didn't miss the chance to make fun of the nickname, but Zheng Gao quickly asked him not to call him that. Even with everyone ready to take action, Han Feng was still suspicious. He couldn't understand how Chief Lu could be such a righteous man that so many people wanted to save him. In the end, Han Feng admitted that he didn't want to get directly involved, since he was still being hunted. Instead, he offered supplies to support the mission, asking only that they keep his abilities a secret, especially those of the Black Hole Girl. After that, he gave Chengdu a meal and showed him the room where he could rest. As the others prepared to leave, Chengdu remarked that, as expected from Han Feng, he had indeed prepared in advance for the disaster, stockpiling a huge amount of supplies. Han Feng replied that he understood the importance of weapons, biscuits, and medicine, but asked why Chengdu was carrying so many cigarettes. The man explained that, with money losing its value, the major groups had started using cigarettes as a form of currency. After that, the three said their farewells, promising that one day they would return. Before leaving, Chengdu bowed to Han Feng and said that one day he would repay the kindness that he and his wife had shown him. The girls, surprised, asked if Han Feng had a wife, and he replied, embarrassed, that of course he didn't. Kim, completely red-faced, said that she would have to clear up that misunderstanding next time. After this episode, to better monitor the mountain road, Han Feng installed surveillance cameras along the climb, and also scattered several cameras throughout the village. Life returned to a calm routine, and everyone began to live in a stable, carefree way. But then, one day, the nightmare started again. Kim came running in panic, holding a knife, saying there was a serious problem. She claimed that Chu Chu had done that thing. At that moment, Kim shouted that Chu Chu had declared that this was the last cabbage in existence, which to Han Feng felt like a true disaster. He immediately asked Chu Chu how many vegetables and fruits were left. Chi Chi replied that there were still plenty, and then she pulled out all the vegetables and fruits from her storage space. Han Feng, astonished, asked if that was what she considered a little, since it looked like she had emptied an entire supermarket. Chi Chu explained that she didn't really like vegetables, so she had only taken what she preferred. Han Feng, suspicious, questioned why she had so many cucumbers. Strangely, Chi Chu replied that it was because she liked cucumbers a lot. Not wanting to imagine the reason, Han Feng turned his attention back to the situation. He said they were consuming supplies quickly, and if they didn't restock, they would soon run out of food. He knew that, at that moment, he could only replicate wheat, soybeans, broccoli, and meat. All his attempts with other vegetables and fruits had failed. Only one cabbage remained. Knowing that they depended entirely on him, Han Feng tried to multiply that single cabbage, but every attempt failed. He began to sink into despair and sadness, wondering why he couldn't achieve even one success. The pressure mounted, and he feared that soon there would be no more vegetables left to eat. Chi Chu, however, suggested that he use the cucumbers she still had. She also commented that the lack of vegetables wouldn't kill anyone, since they could take vitamin pills. That was when Kim suggested they try to grow vegetables themselves. Han Feng replied that it was far too cold outside for that to work, but Kim said that every year she grew vegetables on her home balcony. As long as they managed to maintain proper lighting and temperature, it would be possible to grow vegetables indoors. The first step was to gather a balcony gardening kit, some soil, nutrient solution, and LED lights to provide supplemental illumination. Han Feng was impressed and thought Chi Chu was practically an expert in gardening. However, Chi Chu immediately asked how they were supposed to get all those items, and the other two questioned if she, by any chance, didn't already have them at hand. Outside the house, Han Feng noticed that the sun was completely frozen, which made digging the ground extremely difficult. When Kim tried to dig, the shovel she was using ended up breaking. Back inside the house, they asked Chu Chu how many planting containers she had prepared, and she replied that she hadn't been idle. She had already made several ready. Han Feng assessed that the plastic bottles could be enough, but the frozen soil prevented any real progress. It was then that Chu Chu suggested using a heating crack to melt the ice, but Han Feng believed that wouldn't be enough, since the generated heat would be too limited. He reflected that if only there were a way to melt the ice instantly, things would be much easier. At that moment, Kay stood up and turned to the so-called apostle of bathwater, saying it was time to show his true power. That instantly reminded Han Feng of the strange phenomenon he had witnessed before. He activated the red light of his power and recalled that, the last time he was heating bathwater, a reddish glow had suddenly appeared, and his hand in the water had heated intensely. Thinking about it, he supposed that if he could figure out the pattern of that light, it might be possible to melt the frozen ground. However, even after waiting more than 20 minutes, nothing happened. He then wondered what had been different the last time. Maybe it had been the electric shock he had received. With that in mind, he asked Chu Chu if there was anything around that could give him a small shock. She suggested plugging a high-power extension cord and sticking his finger in, but warned that it could cause a fatal shock. Han Feng replied that he wasn't trying to die, only wanted a light one. Then she remembered a self-defense wand with a lightning element, used for weak shocks. Although it was just a simple personal defense weapon, Chu Chu assured him that it was weak and safe. Han Feng used the wand, and when he electrocuted his hand, the water started to heat up. Realizing that he had managed to activate the ability again, he decided to try applying it to the frozen ground. Still not understanding the exact mechanics of the red light, he decided to ignore that for now, and just focus on the effectiveness of the process. Finally, he managed to melt the ice and gather the needed soil. With that, he filled the containers and declared that the vegetables were ready to be planted. The temperature inside the house wasn't very high, so they chose to cultivate only vegetables that didn't require much heat. Han Feng concluded that the basement had better thermal insulation and decided that, from that moment on, the space would be used exclusively for cultivation. They installed 4 heaters in the place, but even so, they weren't sure if the temperature would be sufficient. If not, the seeds wouldn't germinate. Han Feng had the idea of using his green light on the seeds, believing that if it worked, they might sprout immediately. He tried, following the activation pattern, and managed to make the seeds germinate. Although not every attempt succeeded, he managed to grow dozens of seedlings. However, after some time, they all froze and died. Even with 4 heaters running, the basement temperature was only 10 degrees Celsius. They needed at least 20 degrees Celsius. Han Feng suggested adding 2 more heaters, but Qiu Qiu explained that without improving the thermal insulation of the room, the heaters would have little effect. He commented that the deeper underground they went, the better the insulation would be, and began wondering if they could dig beyond the current basement. Kim, excited, answered that it was no problem, and said they could count on her, since she was confident in her strength to handle the digging. Han Feng mentioned that he intended to test whether his special lights could also affect stones. After some research and experiments, he concluded that the green and red lights were useless in that case. He discovered that only the purple light could soften rocks. However, even if he managed to make the stone a bit softer, the compacted soil mass was still very resistant. So, he tried combining the 3 lights and altering the rhythm of energy output to achieve some result. Despite his efforts, all attempts failed. He reflected that, just as he had failed before when trying to use his powers on dead plants or meat, the same happened with stones, which didn't show any significant change. Probably, it was due to the difference between organic and inorganic matter. After days of countless failed attempts, a miracle finally happened. Unexpectedly, Han Feng discovered that, by pushing the red light's intensity beyond a certain limit, he could pulverize rocks. With this, he finally managed to open a hole in the ground. But after digging just that small section, he was already exhausted and nearly fainting. He admitted to himself that he had no idea how long he could use that power each day. From then on, Han Feng was put in charge of digging. Kim, on the other hand, was responsible for carrying away the soil and rocks that were removed. After 7 days of continuous work, they had already dug more than 10 meters deep and built an underground basement of 20 square meters. With a few simple adaptations, they turned the place into an underground greenhouse. Once they finished, they celebrated their good teamwork. Right after that came Han Feng's favorite part of the past few days, climbing the stairs with Kim walking ahead of him. Qiu Qiu commented that, if everything went well, the vegetables could be harvested in about 2 months. Han Feng was outraged by how long it would take. He thought about how it had already been 2 weeks since they had decided to grow their own food, and the stock of vegetables had run out long ago. For the past 4 days, they had been eating only broccoli, and he wasn't sure if he could endure that diet for another 2 months. He considered whether he could use his green light to speed up the growth of the plants. While he was thinking about it, someone suggested planting beans, since that type of vegetable could be harvested in just 3 days. At that moment, Kim slipped on the stairs and fell right onto Han Feng's face, giving him a divine vision for an instant. Both of them were visibly embarrassed by the situation, but he tried to play it off, saying everything was fine. However, his nose was bleeding, and Kim asked if she could check the injury. Even so, he insisted there was no need to worry. Switching scenes, they decided to see what Qiu Qiu was doing at that moment. She was alone in her room, performing a rather strange ritual. She was fully focused and even made the fusion pose from the anime Dragon Ball. When Han Feng walked in and saw the scene, he asked if she was sick, but she answered seriously, saying that this was the summoning ritual of the evil eye. One of her eyes had stopped working, and now she was preparing to summon another. Han Feng didn't understand right away, but soon realized she was talking about one of the security cameras. It became clear that one of the cameras had stopped working. In that part of the village, there was a cliff on one side and, on the other, a path that went up the hill. Because of that, they had installed a strategic camera at that point, which allowed them to see anyone climbing the mountain. The problem was that these cameras didn't work well during storms. While they were trying to fix the equipment, a strange sound began to spread through the area. Startled, they tried to figure out where the noise was coming from, and someone asked Han Feng what was happening. happening. Han Feng said he wasn't sure, but suddenly a thick fog rose around them. That was a clear sign that someone was nearby. Faced with the risk, they decided to return home immediately. The next afternoon, Han Feng wasn't paying much attention to what had happened on the hills. His mind was entirely focused on the growth of the vegetables. He decided it was time to begin germinating the seeds, but soon realized something was wrong. The seeds weren't reacting as expected, and it seemed he would have to find a new usage pattern for his green glow. After 30 minutes of attempts, he wondered why it wasn't working. All the vegetables directly exposed to the green glow had died, while the ones on the other side of the greenhouse, far from direct contact, had grown a lot. Han Feng suspected that perhaps just a small amount of light was enough, and this guess proved correct. When the vegetables received the green glow for more than 30 minutes, they simply stopped growing. This made it impossible to cultivate the vegetables all at once. The only alternative was to apply the green glow little by little, every day. 5 days passed, and he was very happy to see that his cabbage had grown. However, Chu Chu remarked that the shape of that cabbage was very strange, in addition to being abnormally large. She found it concerning and even joked, saying that the vegetable looked like it was using the same tricks as bodybuilders. Han Feng, on the other hand, wondered if something was wrong with his green glow, but concluded that as long as it was edible, he saw no problem at all. After that, they prepared a banquet to celebrate the efforts of the past 2 weeks. Their work had finally paid off. However, there was still a lot of cabbage left, and Chu Chu commented that she didn't like green cabbage. Han Feng was also tired of eating it. He thought that if Ziyi were with them, he probably would have eaten everything by himself. It had already been 2 weeks since he and the others had left the hill, and Han Feng wondered if they were doing well. Surely, their supplies must have run out by now. At that moment, a very loud noise echoed outside. It was already the 6th consecutive day they had been hearing that sound. Chi Chu commented that it sounded like the roar of the Demon King, but Han Feng dismissed it, saying that whatever was happening out there wasn't their problem. Since the noise only occurred once a day, he didn't think it would greatly affect the group's routine. However, 3 days later, the situation changed. The noise grew stronger and started happening dozens of times throughout the day. Curious, Han Feng climbed onto the roof to check. Looking into the distance, he saw several explosions and couldn't understand what was going on. He wondered who could be behind it and whether those people weren't afraid of revealing their own location. Even if they were far away, a nearby explosion would be a major problem. The reinforced structure of the house might not withstand a direct hit. Back inside, Han Feng warned the girls that, even without fully understanding what was happening, he had decided to reinforce the walls of the house as a precaution. Chi Chu asked how he intended to build a wall, since there was no cement in storage. He replied that they didn't need to worry, because they already had the materials they needed, the stones removed during the basement excavation. With that, they began stacking the stones and pouring water over them. The water froze as soon as it touched the cold air, forming a solid ice wall. The material was so strong it even seemed sturdier than cement. From then on, the group dedicated themselves to thickening all the walls of the structure. Since the stones weren't enough, Han Feng had to dismantle part of the neighboring village to obtain more material. After 3 days of hard work, a massive ice wall was completed. Now, with such thick walls, everyone felt safer, at least for the time being. It was then that an explosion occurred very close to the house where they were. At the same time, the nearby village was completely destroyed, and several stones flew in all directions, striking the barrier they had built. Han Feng thought that, fortunately, he had taken the precaution of erecting the stone and ice wall beforehand. Otherwise, the situation would have been extremely dangerous. Given the severity of the attack, Han Feng rushed inside and ordered everyone to hide as quickly as possible. They spent half a day sheltered in the basement. The following night, while Han Feng was taking a bath, another attack once again struck the neighborhood, forcing everyone back into the cellar. On the morning of the 3rd day, the nearby village was destroyed yet again, and a projectile even hit their wall directly. On the afternoon of the 4th day, just as Han Feng was about to go to the bathroom, they were struck once more. At that point, Han Feng lost his patience. He declared that he could no longer keep living like that. Day after day, they were hiding in the basement, unable to drink, eat, or sleep properly. Determined to end the situation, he told himself he would find out who the lunatic was that kept bombing everything. To investigate, Han Feng went to one of the areas hit by the explosions. There, he found a torn piece of fabric that belonged to a military uniform. That made him suspect the attack might be connected to the same group that had pursued him earlier. Along the way, the number of corpses scattered across the ground made it clear that the battle had been extremely brutal. For safety, he decided to climb the mountain to get a better view of the situation. From up high, he spotted spotted a massive cave that seemed to be part of a military installation. He wondered if it was the 2 trucks he had seen earlier that were firing at the village every day. However, there was something strange about the scene. The soldiers present were moving stealthily, which made no sense if that was really their base. And if it was their base, why were they fighting? Suddenly, an extremely powerful blast erupted from inside the cave, sending the soldiers flying. Han Feng was completely stunned, unable to understand what had caused it. As he moved closer for a better look, he saw that all the soldiers were dead. He wondered who or what could have wiped out those men. At that moment, 3 people emerged from inside the cave. One of them, with white hair, looked directly in Han Feng's direction. He felt a chill run down his spine and thought in fear that he had been discovered, but quickly concluded it was impossible, since he was too far away. However, the girl with pink hair suddenly pulled out a bazooka and fired straight at him. Han Feng immediately ran for his life, shocked that they had actually spotted him. He had no idea how that girl had managed to locate him from such a distance. He found those people extremely strange and decided to retreat even further, so he could watch them from afar. While hiding, he heard gunfire from soldiers attacking the 3 mysterious figures. But the blonde woman reacted by unleashing an avalanche toward the soldiers. Han Feng was stunned. He couldn't understand how such a thing was possible. The snow came crashing down with such force that he was nearly swallowed by it. Luckily, the barricade they had built blocked the snow's advance in his direction. Otherwise, he would have been swept away. At that moment, he began to wonder if those people were capable of controlling snow itself. Nearby, he spotted a soldier still alive. He thought that, with some luck, the man might provide useful information. Taking him to a safer spot, Han Feng tied him up and waited until he regained consciousness. As soon as the soldier woke, he begged not to be killed, promising to reveal everything he knew. Han Feng, who had already imagined countless interrogation methods, was frustrated that he didn't even need to use them. Since the man was willing to cooperate, he asked him to tell everything he knew about those 3 people. The terrified soldier revealed that those enemies weren't human. They had strange powers capable of using ice magic, firing energy blasts, and even causing explosions. One of them, he said, had the power to detonate everything around him. Han Feng, however, suspected this might just be an exaggeration, and asked first about the woman with long white hair. The soldier explained that she could unleash energy explosions, while another girl had an even more frightening ability, turning anything into a bomb. As for the blonde boy, he controlled ice and snow with ease. To the soldier, they weren't human at all. They were monsters. Han Feng realized there were other people with special abilities besides the ones he already knew. Before releasing the prisoner, he asked one last question. Why had they been bombarding the mountain village these past days? The man answered tearfully that it wasn't them, since their camp had been taken over a long time ago. They were only following orders from headquarters now. That was when Han Feng concluded that all the destruction had actually come from those 3 people. But something didn't add up. He didn't even know them, so why were they destroying his home every single day? With no answer, the soldier just wept, saying he knew nothing. Faced with this, Han Feng decided to let him go, but he remained alert, since the gunfire hadn't stopped. It was clear those weren't random shots, they were aimed directly at him. What he still couldn't understand was how they had discovered his location. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the 3 were talking among themselves. The blonde boy praised the skill of the white-haired woman, and the pink-haired girl reminded him that she had been training for days. The white-haired woman stated that after the bombardment, the target's energy hadn't disappeared, it had become even stronger. The boy remarked that avalanches and projectiles couldn't kill him, because he was far too resilient. The woman then ordered that they fire even more projectiles. If the man survived, he would be hunted down, since letting him escape would only attract new enemies. On the other side, Han Feng felt relief when the bombardment finally ceased. He thought that if he hadn't reinforced his house in time, he would already be dead. Now he faced a difficult choice: to confront those 3 enemies or flee. Each of them possessed a dangerous power. The girl who turned everything into bombs could perhaps be contained by the reinforced building, but the energy blasts from the white-haired woman were devastating and had long range. The most dangerous of all, however, was the blonde boy, capable of summoning waves of snow that could easily bury anyone alive. Han Feng knew that if he could strike them from a distance, he might have the advantage, but he wasn't an experienced marksman. He considered setting a trap, but quickly dismissed the idea, since the blonde's control over the snow could easily dismantle it. Then another alternative came to mind: lure the 3 beneath the dam and, at the right moment, open the floodgates to unleash all the stored water. The problem was that the floodgate was massive, at least 7 meters high. On top of that, there was the risk it might be frozen, since it was said the surface ice was 2 meters thick, and the water level beneath that layer could be even higher than the gate itself. For that reason, before putting his plan into action, he decided to inspect everything personally, because if the dam failed to release water at the crucial moment, his death would be inevitable. After testing his powers, Han Feng realized that there was still enough water accumulated. If he could lure his enemies down to the riverbed, he might be able to win that battle. Meanwhile, the 3 adversaries continued searching for him. The white-haired woman ordered the blonde boy, Yuanyi, to attack first, followed by Zixi opening fire. Yuan Yi then unleashed an avalanche toward Han Feng's shelter, but the place had already been reinforced, rendering the attack useless. With his sniper rifle in hand, Han Feng located the group and fired a shot, but the bullet was blocked by an invisible barrier protecting them. The white-haired woman, realizing the avalanche had failed, gave Zixi her turn. At that moment, Han Feng decided to draw their attention. He climbed onto his rooftop and began shouting provocations at the enemies. Irritated, Zixi prepared to shoot, but the white-haired woman seized her weapon, declaring she would be the one to finish him. However, Han Feng was already executing his plan. At the right moment, he opened the dam's floodgates, releasing a colossal torrent of water. The enemies felt no fluctuation of power from him, but soon realized the flood was rushing down upon them. Yuan Yi tried to raise a wall of snow to hold them up, while the white-haired woman created a protective barrier. Yet the force of the water began melting the snow, threatening to sweep them all away. At the last instant, the woman managed to raise another barrier and pulled her companions out. Han Feng observed and concluded that although they hadn't drowned, the intense cold would surely freeze them to death. Relieved, he returned to the cave with the intention of destroying the cannons that had been responsible for so many attacks. Upon reaching the military base, he stayed cautious, wary of encountering armed soldiers. His first thought was to destroy the cannons, but he gave up when he realized the explosion might attract even more enemies. Venturing deeper into the facility, he was astonished by its size. He was startled to find gigantic weapons that, had they been used against him, would have obliterated his home beyond any hope of resistance, no matter how much reinforcement he had built. As a precaution, he began melting those weapons down. The depot was filled with enough supplies to arm an entire army, which explained the greed of the enemy group. Han Feng knew he couldn't carry everything alone, but he also didn't want to let it fall into the wrong hands. He thought that if Chu-Chi were there, she would do a great job organizing and making use of those resources. He decided he would return to the base to fetch her. On the way back, he noticed some rocks had been turned into mines, which exploded right in front of him. From a distance, Zixi cheered, believing their enemy was finally dead, and asked the white-haired woman to confirm. However, upon checking, she was shocked. Han Feng had survived, thanks to the reinforced protection of his armor. He also deduced that the rocks had fallen from above, which meant his enemies were positioned right over him. With a blast of red light, Han Feng collapsed the top of the cave, bringing the three down directly in front of him. Without hesitation, he opened fire with his rifle, even striking one of them in the leg. Just as he was about to finish off the white-haired woman, she pleaded for surrender, and Zixi begged him to spare her sister. Han Feng assessed the situation. With his reinforced armor, he could withstand their attacks for a while, but if he killed the white-haired woman, he might not have enough time to defend himself from Yuan Yi. After some thought, he concluded that he felt no hatred toward them. For him, it was enough if they simply stopped bombing his home so they could all live in peace. The girls, confused, asked what he was talking about, and then Zixi questioned whether he was the man living in the village on top of the mountain. Outraged, Han Feng demanded to know what they thought they were doing, since they had been bombing his house every single day. He explained that this was why he had come there to see the situation for himself. The white-haired woman turned to Zixi and asked if she was really the one behind those attacks. Zixi answered without remorse, saying that the feeling of bombardment was incredible, and that whenever she thought of the rich people who once lived in that region, she couldn't resist wanting to wipe them out completely. Han Feng looked at her in shock, thinking that the girl had to be insane. The white-haired woman, in turn, asked if he hadn't been with the soldiers who attacked her that very same day. Han Feng pointed to his own clothes and told her to notice he was not a soldier. The woman insisted, wanting to know why the soldiers had shown up at the same time as him. Han Feng replied that it was nothing but a coincidence. Suddenly, the woman began to cry. She apologized to Han Feng, saying it had all been a misunderstanding and that he was very handsome. He coldly replied that he wouldn't forgive her just because she was crying, but she explained that she wasn't crying for that reason, but because her leg hurt too much. The scene shifted to the inside of the place, where they treated her wound. Han Feng was surprised to see how she didn't even scream when the bullet was removed from her leg, and realized that the woman was extremely resilient. On top of that, she showed skill with firearms, which revealed she had anything but a simple past. He then stated that from now on they could no longer bombard his house. The white-haired woman agreed, apologized once more, and said they would fully accept his terms. As a sign of apology, she offered him any supplies he wanted to take. Zixi protested, saying she didn't want to share the resources they had worked so hard to obtain. But her sister scolded her, reminding her that if it weren't for the misunderstanding, she wouldn't have been injured. Embarrassed, Zixi apologized. The woman asked Han Feng not to mind it, explaining that her sister was simply impulsive. Still suspicious, Han Feng wanted to know how they had discovered his location so easily. The girls asked him to lower his weapon before they explained, but he refused to trust them. Even so, the white-haired woman decided to speak. She said that ability users emit a a special fluctuation, something similar to a magnetic field. Those who can sense it are able to detect the approximate location of another user. She also revealed that, even before the climate anomaly, some people already possessed special powers. Han Feng grew thoughtful and asked if, with increasing proficiency, it was possible to awaken new abilities. She replied that, as far as she knew, a person could only have a single ability. Han Feng then reflected, intrigued, since he himself possessed 3 different powers, and realized he needed to study that phenomenon more carefully. After that, he introduced himself. He said his name was Han Feng, and that, before all of this, he had been just an ordinary office worker. The woman replied that her name was Jiang Ruo Qing, and told him she had been a teacher before the chaos. But right after, she irritably asked why he had called her a wretched, ugly, and hideous woman. Zixi, excited, cheered at her sister's scolding, and asked if she could blow him up. Han Feng, however, replied that the previous explosions hadn't been able to hurt him, and therefore he wasn't afraid of them. Jiang Ruo Qing explained that she didn't mean to offend him, only to understand why he had said that. Han Feng, not remembering, changed the subject, complimenting her, and saying that a beautiful, elegant, wise, and kind woman like her was every man's dream. Jiang Ruo Qing squeezed his hand firmly, and Han Feng added that she had probably misheard. Zixi grumbled that she wouldn't forgive the enemy just because he was flattering her sister, but Han Feng also complimented her, saying she was a lively, cute, and innocent young woman. Happy, she replied that he really had good taste, although she didn't want to admit she was being won over by his words. In the end, Han Feng stood up and said he would leave for now. He intended to return later with some friends to collect supplies, and also to check if he could get fuel for his home generator. Jiang Ruo Qing said that Han Feng could take as many supplies as he wanted, but suggested he rest there with them for a while. Han Feng thanked her for the attention but explained that he needed to leave. Zixi, annoyed, started arguing, insisting he should stay longer. After the quarrel, Zixi asked her sister if she wasn't going to tell him about the abilities. Jiang Ruo Qing replied that if she revealed it now, he would end up begging later to know the details. Soon after, she noticed Han Feng pretending to be asleep and asked why. He suddenly stood up and said he hated talking to strangers. Jiang Ruo Qing then remarked that he had used his powers a lot that day and asked if he had felt any change in his body. Zixi took the chance to mock him, saying the only thing that had grown on him was his butt. Her sister replied that, fortunately, there didn't seem to be anything serious, but recommended that, for safety, they should all use their abilities as little as possible. Meanwhile, Han Feng was walking alone on the ice, already exhausted. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if his breath would never return. His body wouldn't obey him, and he could barely take another step. Desperate, he signaled to the camera for help. But at that moment, Chi-Chi was sleeping peacefully in her messy bed. The pain in Han Feng's chest grew until he collapsed in the snow. Sometime later, he woke up in his bed, being cared for by Kim. Shocked, he realized he was completely naked and asked what had happened. Kim explained that, the night before, when returning from a food search, she had found him collapsed. To restore his body temperature, she had to remove his clothes, since his body had no injuries. Confused, she asked why he had fainted. Han Feng told her that he had felt an intense pain in his chest. After hearing his account, Kim concluded that it was probably a consequence of the extreme climate. Han Feng, however, was more worried that those 3 people might still be waiting for his return to reclaim the supplies. Chi-Chu ironically remarked that the great evil king already wanted to go on another expedition, but warned that if he didn't rest, he could die. Thus, Han Feng spent the next 5 days under Nurse Kim's care. During this time, he began to train his perception to detect other ability users. He discovered he could already sense Kim's presence, though in an embarrassing situation. He perceived her fluctuation while she was in a strange position in the bathroom. With no privacy, Kim was mortified, but in the midst of the awkwardness, Han Feng finally understood how that perception ability worked, calling it a divine skill. Meanwhile, Jiang Ruo Qing had been waiting for 8 days, believing he would return quickly. When Han Feng finally came back, he was not alone. He brought with him Kim and Chi-Chu, both also ability users. The revelation shocked everyone, as it was believed that very few users were still alive. Han Feng introduced each one, but when Kim and Chi-Chu greeted the others, they remained silent. The cold reaction made Chi-Chu furious, to the point of regretting having come along. Jiang Ruo Qing then stood up and asked for calm, calling Chi-Chu her sister. Chi-Chu stared at her, confused, and replied that she must be mistaken, since she was nothing more than a 1-2-year-old girl. Jiang Ruo Qing insisted, saying she wasn't blind, and began to argue with Chi-Chu, demanding to know why she had disappeared without leaving any word. Chi-Chu calmly replied that she had simply been chasing a new dream. She wanted to live as a recluse, spending her days only eating and sleeping. The revelation left everyone surprised, not understanding what their true relationship was. Ruo Ruo Qing revealed that, to be honest, Qiu Qiu was her biological sister, though they had different parents. The revelation shocked everyone. She then explained that she had been an orphan, but at age 11 she was adopted, and through that, Qiu Qiu became her older sister. The surprise deepened when they realized that many had actually confused the order, believing Qiu Qiu was the younger one. However, Ruo Qing explained that the confusion was natural, since Qiu Qiu had always been small and adorable, even though she was actually a year older. To prove it, she showed a photo from their childhood. Everyone was amazed to see that Qiu Qiu hadn't changed at all since that time. Han Feng reflected that if Qiu Qiu was 21, then her sister was 20, but the contrast between them was so great they looked more like mother and daughter, which he found amusing. However, Ruo Qing didn't appreciate the comparison. Zixi tried to lighten the mood, saying he was only joking, while Ruo Qing added that many things had happened since Qiu Qiu allowed them to leave. At that moment, Qiu Qiu asked what exactly had happened, but the two women turned to stare at Han Feng, making it clear they didn't want him there. As he was about to leave, Qiu Qiu asked him to wait. She said the evil eye had chosen all of them, so they had the right to hear the truth. Han Feng agreed to stay, saying he trusted his best friend. Ruo Qing, respecting her sister's request, decided to be direct. She explained that after she left the institute, the research had been successful, but the professor had been killed and the building destroyed. Qiu Qiu said she already knew all of this, which surprised Ruo Qing, who asked how she had found out. Soon after, she explained that there was a faction in the city hunting ability users, and if they revealed their identities, they would probably be persecuted. Once again, Qiu Qiu confirmed that she already knew. Ruo Qing then revealed that when someone overused their ability, the energy would crystallize within the body, and that they had been researching a way to eliminate those crystals. At that point, Qiu Qiu mentioned that Han Feng had experienced an abnormal growth in his heart in recent days, and that she herself had helped remove the problem. Han Feng was stunned, as he hadn't known anything about it, and demanded to know why she hadn't told him earlier. This left Ruo Qing frustrated, asking if her sister already knew the technique of energy fluctuations. But Qiu Qiu insisted she knew nothing about it, which moved Ruo Qing to tears. To her sister was a genius, and didn't need to make excuses to make her feel better. However, Qiu Qiu assured her she truly didn't master the technique, and praised Ruo Qing's intelligence instead. Even so, Han Feng was already tired of the confusion, and demanded they explain what was really going on. The two of them replied at the same time that what lay ahead was hell, and that he should have realized it from the very beginning. Ruo Qing explained that she graduated from university at the age of 18, while her sister completed her master's degree at 19. They were recognized as brilliant and beautiful young researchers. 2 years ago, the institute accidentally discovered an ability user who had frozen himself. The following year, both sisters suddenly awakened powers, but shortly afterward, Qiu Qiu disappeared. At the start of that year, the institute successfully carried out a plan to create artificial ability users. A few months later, the professor in charge of the research was assassinated inside the women's restroom, a fact that intrigued Han Feng even as the account continued. After the crime, several other researchers disappeared or were killed, until the entire institute building was blown up. Only 3 managed to escape thanks to the use of their own abilities. Han Feng suspected that someone had a strong interest in those studies. Hen confirmed, saying that an organization called the Base was gathering many ability users and was most likely responsible. Han Feng thought they might be the same men they had faced before. He then asked why they hadn't captured one of the soldiers to investigate. At that moment, Ruo Qing clarified that they had already done so with the leader of a squad, but according to him, they weren't from the base but from a group called Juyi Tang. Han Feng was astonished, for he knew that group well. Zixi commented that one of the prisoners had helped an entire community and seemed to be a refined and kind person. However, Han Feng thought that was impossible, since Ziyi would never do such a thing, and within Juyi Tang there was no one refined or kind. Curious, he wanted to know where those prisoners were, as he wished to see them personally. Zixi then led him to the place where a man was being held. To everyone's surprise, the prisoner was none other than Xue. Han Feng had not expected to find him there, and learned that he had once been a squad leader. Xue, in turn, was also surprised to see him, and explained that, at that time, he only sought supplies because he wanted to help other people. Han Feng, suspicious, asked if he was implying that the fault lay with them for not having shared the resources. Xue replied that this wasn't the case, but Han Feng insisted he wasn't innocent, and accused him of having allied with the base, while posing as a member of Juyi Tang. Zixi was shocked to hear this, but Xue swore he wasn't lying. He explained that, at first, he had indeed joined the base, and had been appointed as a squad leader. However, when his group was surrounded by Juyi Tang, they were ambushed and forced to surrender, eventually fighting alongside them. He also explained that, not long ago, Zhu Yitang had sent men disguised as soldiers to try to capture the underground warehouse, and that he himself had been among those defeated and captured. He added that, if they didn't believe him, there was nothing he could do. Overcome with rage, Han Feng grabbed his head and smashed it violently against the bars, demanding to know if he really thought he was as innocent as those he had deceived. Even while being beaten, Shuiyu stuck to his story, claiming that he was already just a prisoner and had no reason to lie at that point. Enraged, Han Feng drew his gun and warned him that he would give him one last chance, demanding that he reveal everything he knew about the base. Shuiyu, however, said that he had spent very little time in the organization and knew almost nothing. Out of patience, Han Feng fired a shot that grazed his ear and made it clear that the only reason he wasn't killing him was because he still saw some value in him. He warned that if he didn't reveal the truth, that value would vanish. After that, they returned, and Zixi commented that he had been brave to face that liar. Later, Han Feng reported everything to Kim and the others, telling them that the prisoner he had found was none other than Shui. The revelation left them horrified. After hearing the details, Ruo Qing said she couldn't believe they had been deceived for so long. Han Feng, however, explained that Shuiyu had indeed once been part of the base, and that the underground warehouse had originally belonged to them. However, there had been a conflict between the base and Zhu Yitang, and for that reason, the former had been hiring people to destroy the rival group. It was then that one of the girls asked whether the leader of Zhu Yitang could be Zheng Gao, but Han Feng told them that Shuiyu had revealed that the current leader was actually Ziyi himself. Everyone was stunned by this, but Han Feng admitted that he hadn't believed it at first either, to the point of assaulting Zhua over that information. According to information provided by Shuiyu, the organization known as the Base currently occupies an international airport and commands nearly 1,000 soldiers. These soldiers scour the city in search of supplies and survivors, recruiting young people into their army in exchange for food. However, all the elderly who die are secretly turned into food, a fact that disgusts everyone when they learn of it, considering it utterly revolting. Despite the collective shock, Han Feng found the girls' calmness strange and asked why they didn't seem surprised. Xian replied that Zheng Gao had already told her about it before. Han Feng grew irritated at hearing this, since Zheng Hao had never said a word to him. He concluded that once the base finished destroying Zhu Yitang in the city, they would likely attack the underground depot where they were hiding. The village where they were staying was not far from there, which meant they would be in danger too. To try to thwart the base's plans, Han Feng decided to take weapons and equipment to the Zhu Yitang group to support them. Qiu Qiu backed the idea. When they reached the armory, Qiu Qiu used her ability and sucked all the items into her black hole. Zixi, impressed, commented that the power was truly formidable, as expected from Ruo Qing's sister. After collecting several pieces of equipment, Qiu Qiu said she was almost throwing up, likely from the strain or the stench of the place. Ruo Qing then asked them to also take the military radios, which had a range of 30 kilometers, so they could communicate in the future. However, when they tried to store the radios in Qiu Qiu's black hole, she warned that she was already at her limit, since even though her black hole was large, it wasn't infinite. The scene then shifted to Ziyi, who reported that the base's forces had surrounded them, and he could no longer find Zheng Gao. Shortly after, a man appeared saying that Zheng Gao's allies had been tied up inside an armored vehicle and were being used as human shields. Outside, the base soldiers announced that everyone was surrounded and threatened to open fire if there was no surrender. As the soldiers prepared to shoot, they realized there was no one in the area. One of them, however, believed Zhu Yitang was indeed there, trusting the captain's words. They informed the captain that they had found no one, and he ordered them to move to the next street, continuing with the original plan. In the backseat of a vehicle, a man questioned Captain Zhao, asking if he was truly capable of carrying out the mission, reminding him that the last time he had let an ability user escape and ended up being disciplined by the commander. Zhao replied that it was very difficult to find people in that area, but he believed that by fully encircling it, no one would escape. The man told him not to worry, saying he was just mocking him, and stepped out of the car. He then summoned a blue flame to light his cigarette. One of the soldiers asked who that guy was, since he seemed very arrogant. The captain replied that he was no ordinary human. Meanwhile, Han Feng praised Yuanyi's ability, which had allowed them to enter the city quickly. Yuanyi, on the other hand, thought to himself that he had only helped because of the promise of fresh meat and vegetables. After some time traveling, they finally reached their destination. Han Feng explained that the lower sewers led directly to the residential area. As soon as they went down, he asked everyone to stay close, since the place was like a labyrinth and it was easy to get lost. After a long walk, Han Feng finally remarked that they had arrived, though he never imagined imagined he would return there. Even though everything had happened in such a short time, to him, it felt as if he had lived an entire lifetime since then. Chi-Chu asked where they could find Zheng Gao, and Han Feng explained that Shu Yu had said they were in the old city district, but he still didn't know the exact location. After about an hour, they noticed that some soldiers were searching for Zheng Gao and Ziyi, but they had already been following those soldiers for a while, and there was still no sign of the two. At that moment, an explosion drew their attention, and Han Feng concluded that Ziyi was attacking the enemy base. However, it seemed they were completely surrounded. Ziyi was using a loudspeaker to taunt the enemies, daring them to kill him if they had the courage. Captain Zhao ordered his men to open fire and leave no survivors, even after a soldier reminded him that the main mission was to find the Juyi Tang's secret key. Still, he insisted that since the Juyi Tang would not surrender, they might as well die right there. Just as the soldiers were preparing to fire, several explosions caught them by surprise. Han Feng and Chi-Chu were hurling grenades at them, clearing a path through the battlefield. The captain recognized Han Feng, furious that it was that same insufferable boy from before, and he quickly assumed that he was there to rescue the Juyi Tang group. Thinking that capturing a special ability user would put him back in his commander's good graces, he ordered his men to forget the Juyi Tang and go after Han Feng instead. Using his ability, Han Feng caused an avalanche that buried everyone, including himself and Chi-Chu. After the impact, Han Feng managed to find Ziyi, who was moved and grateful, saying he thought he was a lost cause. He then introduced Han Feng to his soldiers, declaring that he was now part of their group. Han Feng then revealed that he had prepared something special. When Ziyi asked if it was supplies, since everyone was starving, Han Feng shocked them all by showing several gigantic cannons. The soldiers were stunned, unable to understand how he had gotten them, but Han Feng declared that it was time to strike back and turn the base's enemies into dust. At that moment, Chi-Chu began speaking with religious fervor, telling her apostles to rain down karmic fire upon the world and cleanse it of sin. Han Feng told her to stop with that crazy talk, since no one understood a word she was saying. Excited, Ziyi asked Han Feng to teach them how to use the cannon, but he admitted he didn't know either. Frustrated, Ziyi asked if anyone else knew, and most of the soldiers said they had only ever seen cannons on television. Finally, the youngest of them stepped forward, saying he was a gunner and knew how to operate that kind of weapon. After a long and detailed explanation, Han Feng told him to stop talking and just start firing. Han Feng pointed to a building and ordered the gunner to destroy it completely, claiming the base's enemies were inside. When Ziyi asked how he knew that, Han Feng explained that he had left something special in that building, and once the enemies saw it, they would have no way to escape. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers had found several barrels of fuel and food rations inside. The captain questioned who had stored supplies there and ordered his men to check the area before taking everything, making sure there were no traps. But when he realized that everything around them was fuel, it was already too late to understand what was about to happen. At that moment, the cannons began firing at the building, setting it ablaze and burning the soldiers alive. The captain, seeing the devastating scene, recognized that this was his end. Zixi, worried, warned that the blasts had exposed their position, but Han Feng couldn't hear her over the noise. After 10 minutes of intense bombardment, the building finally collapsed. Everyone celebrated, hailing Han Feng as a true hero. However, he quickly warned them that now that their location had been exposed, they had to escape. Still, Ziyi was so happy that he wanted to take the cannon with them, but Han Feng, looking at the massive weapon stuck in the snow, said it was impossible to move. As a solution, he suggested leaving the cannons there and planting mines around them. That way, when the enemies approached, they would all be blown up. With that settled, Han Feng turned his attention to what mattered most at that moment. He asked Ziyi about the current situation of Chief Liu. Ziyi explained that he still didn't know where Chief Liu was being held, so they would need to capture prisoners to interrogate them. Han Feng asked what had happened to Zheng Gao, and Ziyi said they had separated earlier and had completely lost contact since then. Even so, Han Feng said that sooner or later they would meet again and told everyone to return to the Xingfu community. Not understanding the reason, Ziyi asked why they needed to go back there. Han Feng explained that he had left many weapons and supplies in the underground garage of that community, assuring that with them, everyone could arm themselves to the teeth. Excited, Ziyi began celebrating, saying that Han Feng was amazing. Meanwhile, on the other side of the conflict, the base's soldiers realized the bombardment had stopped and found the cannon that had attacked them. Still, the captain scolded them, making it clear he didn't care about the cannons. What he wanted was for them to find the bastards responsible. However, in the middle of his speech, his wheelchair rolled over a landmine, causing a massive explosion. Hearing the blast, Han Feng wondered who the unlucky soul was who had stepped there. while Zixi was calling for him, asking him to come out and celebrate with the others. The scene then shifted to the celebration. Everyone was eating and drinking in a victorious mood. Only Yuanyi seemed discouraged, isolated in a corner because of his social phobia. Shortly after, the story returned to that mysterious man who accompanied Captain Zhao. He appeared before his superior and reported that the captain had been ambushed and had sacrificed himself with bravery. His chief then ordered him to take command of the unit, since finding the secret key was necessary at all costs. Next, the scene moved to the temporary command post of the 3rd Battalion. The new captain, Zhang Dongshu, remarked that the snowstorm outside was fierce, and only a madman would go out to work in such conditions. Even so, he ordered one of the men to divide the squad into 3 groups and conduct a thorough search. One of the soldiers, upon hearing this, reflected that the former captain always faced hardships alongside them, while this new commander seemed to only know how to relax and enjoy good food. Dongzhu, for his part, commented that once the members of the Juyi Tang ran out of food, they would certainly go out in search of supplies, and at the very moment they attacked the squad, they could be located easily. As he said this, he calmly ate rice, praising its flavor, believing that the enemies were surviving only on snow. However, he had no idea that, in truth, they were all enjoying a true feast. The soldiers of Juyi Tang were exalting Han Feng, calling him master. Han Feng, however, told Zi that he didn't trust those men, since they called anyone chief. Zi explained that this happened because they were all inexperienced and, after seeing Han Feng's actions, they began to recognize him as their leader. For that reason, he should at least try to be kinder to them. After thinking for a while, Han Feng asked if anyone wanted a cigarette. The offer caught everyone by surprise and left many impressed. Some were happy with the gesture, while others began to complain, saying that place was turning into a den of demons. At that moment, Yuanyi approached and told Han Feng that he had already done everything that was asked of him and that he was leaving now. Han Feng agreed, stating that their purpose there was only to deliver the supplies. He then told Zi that he would go his own way. Since he had also gotten directly involved in conflict with the base, he needed to return as soon as possible. After saying his goodbyes and sending the soldiers away from the area, Han Feng went on and eventually found a gigantic warehouse. Zi believed that there were many supplies in that place, and so he asked Han Feng for a few more packs of cigarettes. They intended to use them for negotiations to recover some of their soldiers who had previously been handed over. Han Feng was shocked by what he heard and could not believe that there was a place where living people were treated as merchandise. Zi, however, explained that at that time they had been desperate and had no other choice. Han Feng asked if they were sure the soldiers were still alive. One of the men replied that, at that time, an adult man was worth only 10 jin of grain, while a simple pack of cigarettes could be worth at least 50. Han Feng was shocked to realize how little human life was valued. Zi commented that even grain was cheap compared to the absurd prices of vegetables and fruits, and told a rumor he had heard that 3 very beautiful women had been traded for only 3 fresh tomatoes. Embarrassed, Han Feng even wondered if he could do something like that himself, but quickly hid his thought and said it was revolting. He also realized that if such negotiations existed, it meant the base did not control the entire city. Zi explained that the group used the subway tunnels to transport their troops, thus being able to control only the areas near the lines. Regions without subway access, such as the old city district where they were beyond their reach. Han Feng then understood why Zi was there. It was at that moment that Zi said he needed to rescue his friends, since he was counting on their help to later try to save Chief Liu. But suddenly, he collapsed in front of everyone, revealing a severe wound in his abdomen. Strangely, no one had noticed the large hole in his body before. The scene then shifted, and a man analyzing the wound commented that it seemed inflamed for several days, which indicated Zi had been pretending to be fine for quite some time. Han Feng ordered everyone to leave, as he would try to help Zi alone. After about 10 minutes using his green light ability, he realized it wasn't having any effect. He then asked Chu Chu if she had any medicine with her, but she said no. He then asked Yuanyi if there was anything at the military base, but he too confirmed that there was no proper medication. Han Feng grew worried, thinking that if Zi wasn't treated quickly, he might die. With no other choice, he called Nurse Kim and explained the situation. She instructed him that the first step was to remove the bullet, then clean the wound with saline solution, disinfect it, and finally administer antibiotics and fever reducers. To get those medicines, Han Feng decided to go to the underground black market, together with Chengdu. According to him, the black market was inside a tunnel on the other side of the river, beneath the riverbed itself, and was only a few kilometers away. However, the entrance was dangerous, as ambushes were common at the only access point. As they approached, Han Feng noticed several destroyed vehicles and wondered how many people had died trying to reach that place. Chengdu explained that those who went to the black market usually carried many supplies, which made them easy targets for attacks. Elsewhere in the city, inside a building, a group was discussing the lack of resources. One of the men said they hadn't received anything for 5 days, and that the next day they would surely run out of food. A blonde woman replied replied that they had to wait for people to return from the black market with whatever they managed to trade. She complained that the last captive only carried cigarettes, which was not food. She lamented the possibility of going back to eating human flesh, but the man told her to stop crying, as he had noticed someone approaching. Looking more closely, he realized they weren't in vehicles, but walking in the middle of the avalanche. Meanwhile, Chengdu told Han Feng that the black market was just ahead, and that, according to the rules of the place, they would have to continue the rest of the way on foot. Otherwise, they could be mistaken for raiders and killed by the snow sentinels. After passing through 2 checkpoints, they would finally be inside the market. After walking for a while, Han Feng asked how they would enter. Chengdu explained that the entrance was on the other side. When they finally arrived, Chengdu warned him not to be shocked by what he was about to see. Han Feng said he had already seen everything these past few days, but as soon as he took his first steps inside, he was startled. The one who greeted them was a robot. After Chengdu showed his membership card, the robot asked them to wait a moment and to refrain from any kind of violence, warning that otherwise they would immediately open fire. At that moment, Han Feng realized that the place was even more dangerous than he had imagined. The robot then escorted them to an elevator, which surprised Han Feng, as he hadn't expected to find something like that in a black market. As they walked through the corridors, Han Feng remarked, impressed, that the faction must be extremely powerful, since they had electricity, robots, and even a working elevator. The robot guided them to a door and informed them that they should enter. Han Feng began to wonder if the underground black market was really behind that entrance. He imagined it would be a place ruled by cruel criminals, lawless, where people were killed and robbed, like an auction house for illegal goods. However, as soon as he crossed the door, he came across several corpses scattered across the floor. The robot once again emphasized that any suspicious behavior would be grounds for them to open fire. Han Feng hesitated, uneasy with the environment, but Chengdu insisted that there was no other choice. The robot then pointed to a computer terminal, explaining that all transactions would be carried out there. Alarmed, Han Feng asked if Chengdu also thought this place was completely insane, but he answered naturally, saying it was something one would get used to. Chengdu then selected 3 people to rescue, and the robot informed him that the 3 hostages would cost 4.5 boxes of OAS. Concerned about Zi's condition, Han Feng said they would also need medicine. With that, the price rose to 17 boxes of OAS, which he thought was outrageously expensive. After completing the payment, the robot asked them to wait for the delivery of the items. Han Feng couldn't stop thinking that they might be robbed and killed right afterward. But Chengdu assured him that this black market was respectable and always kept its promises. To everyone's relief, the robot returned with all the requested goods, as well as the 3 rescued humans. Excited, Chengdu said he would finally bring his friends back home. Afterward, the robot addressed Han Feng and confirmed that the 10 video game consoles and 30 photo albums of women had been delivered, asking him to check the order. Surprised, Chengdu commented that 30 albums was excessive and that Han Feng needed more self-control. After collecting all the items, the 2 of them ran out of the place, saying they would never return to that hell again. Outside, Chengdu asked if he could keep 5 of those albums. Han Feng said that was too much, but agreed to give him 2. Soon, the 2 began negotiating over the women's albums. At that moment, Yuanyi, who had been their transport the entire time, said he was tired and also wanted 2 albums as compensation. However, they scolded him, saying that children couldn't look at that kind of thing. Before they could continue, a bullet struck Han Feng in the chest, fired by a man who appeared suddenly. Immediately, a gunfight broke out between Han Feng's allies and the mysterious attacker. Meanwhile, Chengdu screamed and fired at the man, saying that he had killed his brother. Han Feng, watching, thought that he had only asked him to cause a distraction, but Chengdu seemed to be overacting too much. Using his red ability, Han Feng disintegrated part of the building's structure, causing the man to fall into the snow. Seeing him alive, the man was shocked and said it was impossible, since Han Feng shouldn't have survived. But Han Feng explained that he always wore a bulletproof vest whenever he left home, as a basic precaution. The man, incredulous, asked how he still had such a vest during the apocalypse, and if he was some kind of base soldier. He revealed that he himself was just a former member of the White Tiger, and that the group had long since surrendered to the base. He also said he had known Captain Zhao and had participated in the attack against Zhu Yitang. Without a second thought, Han Feng shot the man in the head and said that if he had done all that, then he deserved to die right there. He then spoke loudly, drawing the attention of a woman who was hiding. He had heard her crying and knew she was nearby. The woman emerged from behind the rubble carrying a backpack and begged him not to shoot, saying the man had kept her imprisoned there for days. She thanked him for saving her life and revealed that the backpack was full of cigarettes, stolen by that man. She then promised that from that moment on, she would be Han Feng's most loyal servant, and that he could ask anything of her. Embarrassed, Han Feng said that this wasn't the place for such a proposal, but assured her she didn't need to worry, because they were no longer the same people they once were. However, However, the woman quickly pulled a knife from the backpack and called him useless. But Han Feng was already expecting something like that and shot her several times before she could react. As she lay dying, the woman asked how he could shoot such a beautiful woman. Han Feng, without hesitation, replied that it was precisely that which made him suspicious. A woman supposedly held captive for several days, yet still intact, with clean clothes and even wearing makeup, was a clear sign of a trap. He wasn't stupid. Xiangdu appeared shortly after and praised Han Feng's composure, saying that he himself would have hesitated upon seeing such a beautiful woman. Han Feng replied that he only fired because that woman reminded him of someone from his past. Xiangdu then understood the reason why he had been so resolute. Right after, Han Feng asked why they didn't use those cigarettes to trade for grain on the black market. Xiangdu explained that it wasn't possible to enter the black market without a membership card. Curious, Han Feng asked how he got his own card, and Xiangdu said that in order to get one, it was necessary to pay a membership fee of 5 packs of cigarettes. Han Feng checked his backpack and realized he only had 4. Even so, the two returned home and immediately began treating Ziyi's wound. The next day, both Ziyi and the 3 rescued people were recovering and seemed stronger than ever. Excited, Xiangdu declared that he would appoint Han Feng as the new leader of Juyi Tang, but he immediately refused, stating that he had no intention of taking on that role. He said he only helped out of respect for Ziyi, nothing more. 2 days later, with Ziyi completely recovered, Han Feng announced that the injury was no longer a problem and that it was time for him to return to the place he came from. Ziyi, moved and with tears in his eyes, begged Han Feng to stay a few more days. He said he hadn't even been able to repay him yet for saving his life, but Han Feng calmly told him not to worry about that. He promised that he would send a batch of supplies every month and asked Ziyi to take the radio and never lose it. Overjoyed, Ziyi jumped on the bed, saying that with this, they would finally be able to rescue Chief Lu. But he quickly curled up in pain as he felt the wound that was still healing. From that moment on, with the resources he began receiving from Han Feng, Ziyi eventually took over leadership of Juyi Tang. But that was a story for another time. On the way back, Han Feng mentioned that, once he got home, he would reward the boy for all the work he had done for them. He told him that in his house there were heaters, a comfortable indoor temperature of 10 degrees, a television, and even a video game that the boy could play as much as he wanted. Shi Chu, upon hearing this, added that there was also a bathtub and a sauna. The boy was impressed, thinking it all sounded amazing. But even so, he said he still preferred the cave where they lived. However, upon arriving home, Han Feng was shocked to find everything frozen. The house was completely overtaken by ice, and he couldn't understand how his village had ended up that way. He stood there in silence, wondering what could have happened. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Your support means a lot and helps me bring even more content for you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.